Chapter 476. Even though the society had already come to a conclusion, Luo Nan still needed to reconfirm it. This helped him establish his own logic. From the looks of things, it was indeed an ability user. The body's basic strengthening, bones, muscles, and neural networks, as well as its special texture and structure could be seen with a glance by an insider. Of course, there was the possibility of technological modification. One needed to make a further judgment from the functions of the body. The changes in the human body's functions were more hidden. One needed to start probing from the internal organs, blood flow, nervous reflexes, and so on. It had to be comprehensive. But the problem was that the target was nearly 10 kilometers away from Luo Nan. He could only indirectly capture it through the living starry sky. Relying on this method to mobilize a small amount of soul strength was like scratching an itch through one's boot. Luo Nan scratched a few times but was unable to grasp the gist of it. In the end, he could not help but ask He Yuan, "Can we meet that one side?" That one. An ability user clone. I think I might be able to find a new clue. Before He Yuan could respond, Cat Eyes had already exclaimed in admiration, "You know it's a bomb, yet you still want to go." Luo Nan simply ignored her. He Yuan's expression did not change. She answered, "Sure." Cat Eyes was shocked, but He Yuan immediately changed the topic. "Let's meet at the laboratory. The clone will be transferred to the branch laboratory soon. You just happen to be going there." The branch laboratory. Where is it? Luo Nan did not react for a time. He simply asked, but Cat Eyes made a fuss over nothing. Shangding. He Yuan first instructed Si Guoxing to reserve the elevator. Then she answered, "According to the established arrangements, we will go to the Shangding building and spend the night there. Considering the direction of the enemy's current information leak, inviting Mr. Luo there should be the safest choice." The Shangding Grand Xia was where the Xia City branch office was located. This name was fake. Its true security lay in the fact that the Xia City branch president, Ouyang Qin, spent all year long in the laboratory on the 13th floor of the Shangding building. Any enemy who wanted to make a move there would first need to eliminate a peak extraordinary. Sure enough, the treatment is extraordinary. This time Cat Eye's praise was genuine, but she immediately reacted. Her eyelids jumped twice. "You mean, the enemy is very likely to be an organization that can provide a clone with the energy it needs to divide and multiply in a short period of time cannot be underestimated. If it's an individual, then their abilities are even more inconceivable." Shi Yuan did not directly come to a conclusion, but the meaning behind her words was as such. Now, Cat Eyes truly understood why the society had mobilized so many people. Right now, she even felt that this sort of protective measure was too conservative. Even if she guessed correctly and bumped into them, there was still some doubt as to what effect it would have. The communication between the two of them was already very straightforward. The final layer of paper was only because of their safety instincts. They didn't want to directly mention such a fearful and powerless target. The problem was that Luo Nan had diverted most of his attention to the ability user clone body halfway through. His train of thought simply couldn't keep up. He only felt that deep probe would do as soon as he got there. It was simple and fast, and there was no need to beat around the bush. "Let's meet in advance. I think the source of the clues should still be in the square." When Cat Eyes heard this, she immediately put on a solemn expression. She solemnly raised her hand and declared, "Can I withdraw now?" He Yuan patiently explained, "We aren't sure how dangerous the plaza is. Preemptive detection might attract the other party's attention, which means preemptive contact. Isn't this the same as capturing the target? Then let the hundreds of thousands of people in the square explode into the sky." Luo Nan was stupefied for 2 seconds. He looked at He Yuan's expression and finally came to his senses. He didn't say anything for a time. The atmosphere in the room turned a bit silent. A few seconds later, Yuan spoke softly. The vicinity of the plaza is under martial law. Low and high altitude traffic levels have been sealed. We will first take a car to the periphery, then we will transfer to an aircraft. We should be able to reach Shangding in 40 minutes. I will notify the relevant personnel to send the target clone body as soon as possible. If everything goes smoothly, you and President Ouyang will be able to research and exchange relevant topics tonight. Luo Nan still didn't say anything. He just nodded. The car is ready. Let's go. The group of people crowded around Luo Nan and headed for the backup elevator. Si Guisheng was standing guard over there. He was a bit surprised when he saw Luo Nan and the others come over. We still need to wait for around 3 minutes. Yuan paused for a moment before nodding. Got it. Cat Eyes watched from the side. She felt that this was quite interesting. From Yuan's perspective, this 3-minute delay could already be considered a mistake. Clearly, her forceful confrontation with Boss Luo had caused her mind to fluctuate a bit. Was it worth it? Everyone was waiting for the elevator. Luo Nan's head was lowered in a daze. It was unknown where his thoughts were going. There was still time. Cat Eyes thought for a moment and moved closer to Yuan. She laughed lowly and said, "Serving a capricious boss is quite stressful." Yuan glanced at her and actually admitted, "There's pressure." Cat Eyes chuckled, "I heard that you guys gave him a lesson before, but it seems like the results weren't that great. He still lacks the necessary general knowledge." Yuan shook her head. "We can give Mr. Luo some general knowledge, but it's impossible for Mr. Luo to share his personal perspective with us. Once there's a conflict, it's very difficult for me to make an accurate judgment. I can only estimate based on the level of danger." "Hey, wake up." Cat Eyes extended her hand to touch Yuan's forehead. "Do you have a fever, or do you have the legendary hidden M constitution? It's good enough that I didn't beat him up just now, but here you are criticizing yourself." Yuan's gaze flitted across Luo Nan's back. "You're an expert in the field of mental sensing, don't. A certain someone is here, don't hit my face." "Alright, what's your all-encompassing sensing range?" "A radius of 70 meters. It seems like there's a breakthrough." Hee. It could be said that there was progress, and it was a sudden increase of 40%. But what made Cat Eyes speechless was that this progress was only obtained after she bowed to Luo Nan's feet and was influenced by the closed system. Fortunately, this was only a prelude to the topic of discussion. Yuan continued in a low voice, "When people stand here, the line of sight of an ordinary person stops at the elevator door. I can see the circular corridor 30 meters away. You can see the outer walls of the building. And Mr. Luo can see the municipal plaza at least a kilometer away. Perhaps there are even more scenes of deep space that we are unable to understand. Do you agree?" I agree." The deep space that Yuan spoke of was another name for the abyss region and polar region on the mental plane. It was also called the deep sea. In any case, it had the same meaning. Cat Eyes was unable to refute this because she knew that Yuan's assessment of the limits of Luo Nan's ability was still severely conservative. And speaking up to this point, she guessed most of Yuan's words. Insight determines knowledge. We can't hope that the common sense of an eagle is similar to that of a fox and a rabbit. The common sense of a human and a god are completely different. And the latter is often correct. That's what you mean. Cat Eyes was unsure whether or not Luo Nan was paying attention to the conversation over here. She was also unsure whether or not Yuan had already sensed the signs of abnormality between her and Luo Nan. But there were some words that she had to spit out. Perhaps God is indeed a head higher than us. Perhaps God is truly great and his wisdom is correct. But Secretary, common sense is different. How can knowledge be the same? Are you sure that God will always sit on our side? Are you sure that everyone will always be the same? At least we still have a mutual adaptation process. What do you think marriage is? Perhaps it would be more accurate to use marriage or experiments. Yuan's eyes were bright and penetrating. Her words were weak but clear. We live in the darkness. We only hate the fact that we cannot see far enough. So many experiments are needed. Many kinds of combinations are needed. Perhaps we will bump into a wall and crash into a mountain. Perhaps there will be evil creatures that go against ethics. But if luck descends, hope will always be born. Cat Eyes looked stupidly at Yuan for 2 seconds. She suddenly moved her body back to pull away some distance. Let's be frank. What religion do you believe in? Yuan laughed involuntarily. It was at this time that Luo Nan suddenly spoke. Can I watch a recording of the fight? Luo Nan's bouncing target and his clear and bizarre train of thought were brimming with Luo Nan's personal style. But Yuan actually understood. Are you talking about the ability user clone body? You can. But the recording time is very short. The opponent seems to have no desire to continue fighting. Yuan operated a bit as she spoke and shared a video in the mission window. It was just as she said. After the interrogation of the target failed miserably, the members of the society, who were actually Luo Nan's security team, charged into the interrogation room. But the target only made 2 moves for a brief moment. It was mostly to confirm that Yuan's words were clear. He gave up resisting and allowed the security team to subdue him. Then he entered the soul detachment state. He was a very dedicated messenger. Or perhaps it could be said that he was purely a tool to convey messages. The 2 sides exchanged blows for a bit more than a second at most. But the moment they exchanged blows, the explosion of air and the glass of the tables and chairs that were innocently destroyed showed that this ability user had a body quality and reaction ability that was above the level of a clone body. Luo Nan still did not give up on probing. He just made some slight adaptations. He set this 1 or 2 second video to play on a loop. He tried to find the pattern of the flow and focus of vital energy from within, and then he pushed it back. Gym Master Xiu's curriculum was extremely targeted, and Shuelei put in a lot of effort to make the sparring matches infinitely close to the level of actual combat. This helped Luo Nan quickly accumulate experience and insight. And he just so happened to learn the stance of an ability user's clone body in an instant. Gym Master Xiu and Shuelei focused on this stance of attack and defense. They talked about many different moves and the corresponding key points. But perhaps it would be better to be a bit more professional. Do you have the information on the 2 people fighting the target? Something like the body technique school. Cat Eyes was curious. You really can see something. Oh. Cat Eyes rolled her eyes at Luo Nan's O.S. Yuan did her duty scrupulously. She immediately dug out the relevant information on the 2 security personnel. She paid close attention to Luo Nan's security team. She left nothing out. Luo Nan glanced at her. Can I share this with others? I want to ask Leicester for some reference. Yuan muttered to herself for a moment and said, You can, but don't tell him the specifics of the situation here. Luo Nan didn't say anything further after getting permission. He called Shuelei and sent him the relevant information. He asked for a professional opinion. Shuelei responded with lightning speed. Our human whip hand grabs and grabs with an internal retraction force. However, this force was scattered. In order to avoid injury, the force leaked out, resulting in a sonic boom. The airflow was also swirling. The opponent's strength is firm and fierce. The explosive force is astonishing, and there's a bit of an internal refinement technique. It's not pure muscle flow, right? Yes. There should be energy circulation, storage, and a concentrated explosion. It's like what we call the Chuan Martial Arts Academy's internal breath. Or perhaps the format of fire. Shui was able to speak of the format of fire. This proved that Shui was constantly adapting to the inner world. Luo Nan laughed. His attention flashed back to the clone body 10 kilometers away. Whether it was internal breath or the format of fire, they were both profound techniques. A deep foundation was needed to utilize them. If this was truly the case, then the corresponding muscles and joints and the direction of vitality should have an inertial strengthening. Yes, his judgment was correct. Luo Nan mobilized his soul strength and was barely able to probe this level. This was thanks to the fact that the target was in a detached soul state. It was just an empty fleshly shell. It didn't cause any interference to Luo Nan. If it were anyone else, even if it were a normal person who was sleeping soundly or unconscious, the difficulty would have increased by a level. However, Luo Nan encountered a true hurdle next. If he wanted to trace the source of supernatural power, he couldn't just look at the muscles and joints. He needed to trace it back to the level of the nervous system. He needed to examine the thickness of the myelin sheath of the relevant nerve pathways, the corresponding chemical substances, and the form of electrical signal transmission. All of these details were for the sake of peeking at the efficiency and form of this person's internal energy programming. The so-called internal energy programming was something Luo Nan had comprehended from the burner simulator, the format of fire. The name was also something he came up with himself. The researchers of the archetype format created the special form of energy known as the format of fire. It was known to be a method that far exceeded the combustion efficiency of ordinary people. It mobilized the potential of the human body and embodied the direction of human evolution. Combined with their theory, the human body was considered hardware. Its functions were roughly integrated functional modules. Cultivators needed to build the most efficient operating system upon this foundation. They wanted to achieve the effect of using simplicity to control complexity, using the limited to control the infinite. Regardless of the emotions in his heart, the description of the fleshly body's abilities was extremely accurate from a theoretical perspective. Luo Nan's current train of thought was to start with the human body's blood vessels, fibers, nerves, and other basic hardware. He wanted to probe their integrated laws and train of thought to see whether or not he could lock onto the source mechanism of supernatural power. Only supernatural power could bestow supernatural power. Whether or not these words were correct didn't matter. If Luo Nan truly probed to this level, the other party would have to reveal some clues. His thoughts were quite clear. He had indeed relied on his professional insight to find a few threads of thought. He was able to deduce a few possibilities. But when the mental scan revealed the truth, the limitations of being unable to sense and being able to control things from a distance were undoubtedly exposed. He couldn't get in. He just couldn't get in. The small amount of soul strength he sent through the living starry sky was greatly affected by a few carriers. After all, there weren't any believers there. There weren't any stable and unobstructed transmission channels. He also needed to control the interference level, grasp the probing precision, and especially avoid harming the carriers. Several restrictive conditions piled together. The amount of power he could truly mobilize wasn't even 1,000th of his normal level. Whether it was precision, accuracy, or penetrative force, they were far from reaching the applicable standards. Moreover, they were greatly affected by the environment. Not to mention anything else, just the fact that a few related people were coming and going was enough to make his efforts collapse. Luo Nan was a bit irritated after several fruitless attempts. He fiercely smacked the side panel of the elevator, and an empty sound rang out. His soul strength also smashed down to vent on the probing target. Everyone in the elevator gave him sidelong glances. Luo Nan didn't pay any attention to them. He just felt even more depressed. He could hear the echo when he smashed the wall. He knew whether it was empty or full. But when his soul strength smashed over. Luo Nan's movements froze. 10 kilometers away, in the public security center of the municipal plaza, the ability user clone body shackled to a chair remained motionless. The nearby monitoring personnel didn't sense any abnormalities. However, Luo Nan could faintly sense that when his soul strength smashed over in a venting manner, the target should have received some external stimulation. There was some feedback, and it appeared in the living starry sky. Oh, it wasn't the target himself. There was no mental activity over there. What truly responded was the surrounding environment. Luo Nan's venting smashing attack did not control the range well. Not only did it smash onto the clone body, but it also affected the surrounding people. Fortunately, it was used for penetrative probing. It had no destructive power. But this kind of smashing attack was like throwing a stone into an abyss. An echo came from far away, reflecting the situation at the bottom. There was a circle of people inside and out, and in the middle was a living dead. It was impossible for the living starry sky to directly map the life sketches of the living dead. But when Luo Nan's soul strength swept over, the interference mode he specially set up to observe the internal energy programming of the living dead reacted with the target and the surrounding normal people. The target strengthened muscles, joints, nerves. These superficial fragments of information, under the unification of the fleshly combat theory, inadvertently formed a certain aspect of the internal energy programming. Even though it was just scraps in a claw, even though it was weak beyond comparison, it still revealed its unique characteristics. But this alone wasn't enough. The key lay in the fact that the interference probe mode Luo Nan set up was targeted at the living dead. It was targeted at the empty shell of a fleshly body that didn't possess self-awareness, powerful bodily functions, and astonishing explosive power. Any normal person would naturally radiate life psionic pressure, and the probing waves would be completely obliterated into nothingness. One was raised, and the other was suppressed. The outward appearance was a clear difference between the peaks and troughs of the waves. It formed a unique echo that only Luo Nan could hear. If this was the case, Luo Nan's inspiration was suddenly stimulated. He didn't hesitate at all. He went to do it. Incorporeal ripples undulated in the living starry sky. It was as if Luo Nan had transformed into an enormous bat at this moment. He emitted a special sound wave, and it spread to all the regions covered by the living starry sky. He had done similar things before, but he had limited the range and made directional probing attacks. But now, he had transformed his soul strength into a special wave to cover the entire living starry sky. He had taken the initiative to probe millions of people. His impression of this was unprecedented. He had never even thought about it before. If Luo Nan's control was a bit careless, if he messed up the interference mode, if the level of his power was off, and if the probing waves were not dissolved in time, he would attack millions of people at the same time. He would become public enemy number one. This was no joke. Fortunately, Luo Nan was used to operating on the mental plane. The buffer zone was large, and his control was sufficient. Nothing unexpected happened when the wave of probing went down. The vast majority of people passed by in a daze. They were completely unaware that a deranged young man had greeted them at the same time and received a special response. At this moment, Luo Nan could probably say that it was as if he had the help of the gods. The method he used in the living starry sky was controlled to near perfection under the burning state of his inspiration. Even He Yuan, who was close at hand, didn't detect it. Only Cat Eyes, who was within the system, had a slight reaction. But she didn't quite understand what Luo Nan had done. She just faintly felt that her boss seemed to have done something extremely subversive. Her heart throbbed a bit. She really was a bit scared. After all, Luo Nan's performance a few dozen seconds ago was quite irritable. For this reason, she used the channels within the system to privately inquire. "What the hell are you doing?" Luo Nan didn't respond. The difference between transcendental observation and active contact with the same target was far greater than the difference between passive radar and active radar. and a considerable portion of the information belonged to the type of absolute reaction. He was unable to precisely control it. Waves of echoes came surging back. An enormous amount of information quickly filled all of his perceptual channels. The large machine of his self-system had to operate at full capacity to digest and identify the information. Now every believer, including Cat Eyes, felt more or less pressured. It was only because of the difference in cultivation and knowledge that there was a difference. Cat Eyes turned slightly pale. Luo Nan couldn't care about anything else. He used all of his mental energy to identify the information. He searched for the unique voice print amidst the large amount of disturbing noise. He gradually determined its number, location, and level. Ding! The backup elevator arrived. The elevator door opened, but it was empty inside. Si Guisheng, who was in front of the control panel, reached out and pressed the button to open the door. He cast his gaze toward Luo Nan. In reality, the gazes of everyone in the elevator were focused on Luo Nan's body. If this core character didn't move, then no matter how the others moved, it would be meaningless. Luo Nan's sudden eruption of irritable emotions made everyone confused and even more helpless. 2 seconds passed and Luo Nan still didn't move. He still had one hand on the wall and his head was lowered. It looked like he was thinking, but it also looked like he was continuing to be angry with himself. He Yuan thought for a bit and took a step forward. She said softly, "Mr. Luo, we're going to, wait a moment." Luo Nan interrupted He Yuan's words. He continued to support himself against the wall with his head lowered. His breathing was a bit hurried. Not long after his voice fell, the crisp sound of a high heel hitting the ground came from far away. There were other footsteps mixed within. Then someone laughed and said, "Sister G, our luck is pretty good. We made it in time." The two people pushed open the wooden door to the safety passageway as they spoke and walked into the elevator. One of them was a young man wearing a suit and leather shoes, but he carried 2 large bags. The other was a long-haired beauty. Her hands were empty. She was dressed casually, but her makeup was exquisite. Right now she was holding her beautiful hair, slightly coiling it. It seemed that she had come out in a hurry and wanted to do a simple hairstyle. The young man was startled when he saw the people in the elevator. He nodded in a very friendly manner. There was a nameplate on his chest. Clearly, he was a staff member of Mingtang culture. As for the long-haired woman in the back, she inadvertently swept her gaze around when she was fiddling with her hair. She saw the faces of the people on this side clearly. It was as if she had been electrocuted. Her back straightened and her body froze on the spot. There was another sound from the door behind them. Manager Shaw popped out from who knows where. She probably felt that Luo Nan and the others wouldn't ride the elevator with other people. She displayed her intense desire and shouted, "Ji Cheong, you guys wait." The long-haired beauty, Ji Cheong, suddenly woke up with a start. She turned around in the first instant. However, she turned too quickly and the heels on her feet were too high. She nearly tripped and fell. She supported herself against the wooden door of the safety passageway before she could stand firm. She cut a bit of a sorry figure and her voice trembled. "Okay, Manager Shaw, it's fine. It's fine." At the elevator entrance, Luo Nan finally caught his breath. He straightened his body and tidied his clothes a bit. He turned to He Yuan and said, "Sister Yuan, why don't we all go together? Don't make us wait in vain." He Yuan looked back. She thought for a bit before responding. Chapter 477. Luo Nan's words were effective in most situations, especially with the amplification effect of Manager Shaw. A few seconds later, everyone had entered the elevator. However, as the elevator doors closed, the atmosphere in the enclosed car tilted towards awkwardness at a visible speed. The one with the most abnormal behavior was Ji Cheong. As a C-list celebrity with a bit of fame in the company, she was quite familiar with Director Shaw. With the advantage of being a woman, she was good at dealing with people. However, after entering the elevator, she stopped fiddling with her hair. She let the thick curtain of hair fall down and cover half of her face. She stood in the corner on the right front of the elevator car, looking down at the metal wall. Her body was tense, making one suspect that once the elevator door opened, she would immediately rush out and get as far away from some people in the elevator as possible. Supervisor Shaw knew that there was a problem, but he knew that the more he said, the more mistakes he would make. Therefore, he just played dumb and kept his mouth shut. Fortunately, Luo Nan had no intention of opening his mouth. He stood in the rear left corner of the sedan. He Yuan and Cat Eyes were at his side, while Gouda and Si Guishing formed a simple human wall in front of him. They separated him from the other people in the elevator. Because it was an exclusive elevator, it didn't stop at the middle floor and soon reached the exclusive passage at the bottom floor. With a ding, the elevator door opened. Ji Cheong was indeed the first to exit the elevator. She walked forward with her head down. However, even if Luo Nan and the others wanted to go to the underground parking lot, they still needed to travel with her in this half-sealed passageway. Supervisor Shaw was rather dissatisfied with Ji Cheong's performance. Even if she was afraid, who was she trying to make it so obvious? He was worried that Luo Nan would be dissatisfied, so he pretended to reprimand the staff member next to him. He supported Luo Nan and said, "Little you, your time management is far too amateurish. She's so anxious. What was she doing earlier?" The employee with the surname you didn't say much. He just laughed and blocked the elevator sensors with Manager Shaw, inviting Luo Nan's group to go first. After exiting the elevator, he Yuan ordered God and Si Guishing, "Go start the cars, two of them." As she spoke, she tossed out two small access keys. God and Si Guishing caught them firmly. They looked at each other and left quickly without saying anything. The two burly men walked like the wind and quickly overtook Ji Cheong. Ji Cheong was startled. She walked too quickly and sprained her ankle. She hurriedly held onto the side wall of the tunnel and finally slowed down. Luo Nan remained silent in the elevator for a few dozen seconds. It was as if his mind had wandered off to another world. He had no reaction to the little details that happened before his eyes. He followed He Yuan and Cat Eyes as they walked forward. However, just as he walked 20 meters away, he stopped without warning. Cat Eyes turned her head. "What's wrong?" "I forgot something." Cat Eyes snorted, "You're so forgetful. Don't bother with small toys. The flowstone kit I bought for my sister. I left it at room 5621. I haven't touched it." Cat Eyes whistled. "Tycoon. But I think my share is pretty good. It's worth it." Manager Shaw came over just in time. It's fine. Little you can make another trip. It's not a big deal anyway." Xiao Yu was obviously taken aback. Luo Nan's gaze swept over. He shook his head and said, "No need to trouble yourself, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. The elevator hasn't even gone up yet." Manager Shaw maintained a fawning smile on his face, but he was already quite unhappy with Xiaoyu's hesitation. Youngsters these days can't even keep their eyes peeled. How can they get a promotion and pay raise in the future? Xiao Yu faced Manager Shaw's icy gaze, and he finally understood the social truth that an arm cannot twist a thigh. He revealed a smile and said, "I'll be right back." Then he hurried to the elevator 20 meters away. He was still carrying two large bags on his back, but there was no one here to help him. Manager Shaw hated that he couldn't bring out a chair and invite Luo Nan to sit down and rest. His smile grew even more brilliant. "Just wait a moment, sir." Ji Cheong rubbed her ankle before he could finish speaking. She whispered, "Xiao Yu, leave my bag behind." Xiao Yu instinctively went, "Oh." He walked back and handed one of the bags to Ji Qiong. Only then did he leave under Manager Xiao's cold gaze. Ji Qiong couldn't care less about Manager Xiao's thoughts. She spoke softly, "It's almost time for the rehearsal. I'll go backstage first." Manager Xiao's gaze swept between her and Luo Nan's body. It was better to have less trouble than less trouble, so he responded. "Fine. Don't be in too much of a hurry. It wouldn't be good if you get hurt and delay the performance." Ji Qiong let out a breath of relief after obtaining Manager Xiao's permission. She was just about to turn around and leave when a voice suddenly rang out by her ear. It was extremely close. "I want to ask you about something." Ji Qiong jumped in fright. She turned around in fright, her hair flying up and sweeping across Luo Nan's face. The eyes of the other person narrowed, and they fell into Ji Qiong's eyes. She only felt that the glow in those eyes was growing more and more treacherous. She reflexively lowered her head to avoid the gaze. She said, "I'm sorry," but she didn't receive a response from Luo Nan. She raised her head again, and she saw the young man in front of her staring fixedly at her. What in the world does this person mean? Ji Qiong was a bit flustered, but there was still a bit of restlessness in the depths of her heart. In this short period of time, her secret relationship with He Donglu had been exposed by this young man and a few others. She still remembered He Donglu's helpless appearance after he left the house in disappointment. There was no doubt that this 16 or 17-year-old so-called boss Luo had an extremely high status. It was so high that even He Donglu, this super-rich young master, had to be fearful of him. Of course, she felt restless from the bottom of her heart to be targeted by such a character. But if the reason for his extraordinary attention was because he fancied her beauty, then it would be a better result. It didn't matter whether she was caught in the act or not. In any case, as long as he wanted to make a move, she wouldn't have the slightest ability to resist. If she could develop such a young and high-status client, then it would be a blessing in disguise. However, she thought about it further. The well-known dance instructor of the city, Cat Eyes, had a deep relationship with this person. And there was also that sister Yuan, whose words carried a lot of weight. She wasn't inferior to Ji Qiong in terms of appearance and figure. It couldn't be that this young man was a little mischievous. He was experienced in this path, seeking excitement, and liked this sort of style. While she was letting her imagination run wild, Luo Nan extended his hand without any warning. He pulled a strand of hair from her shoulder and twirled it between his fingers. Ji Qiong was stupefied on the spot. Even though she was naturally bold and unrestrained, she couldn't help blushing in this kind of situation. And the cold and clear gazes of the two people of the same gender made her heart palpitate with guilt. However, what made her restless the most was still Luo Nan's eyes. With her hair pulled, she was forced to look at Luo Nan face to face at a close distance. She saw that this young man was probably wearing contact lenses. The excessively bright reflections covered most of the information, but she couldn't see the lust and greed that she was most familiar with. The corresponding expression and gaze were like that of a child playing with a new toy, revealing a feeling of curiosity and satisfaction like, "So it's like this." Ji Qiong had never seen this type of person before, but she had heard of him. He was simply a type of pervert who didn't treat people as people. He was someone who could torment people to the extreme. If he was someone like that, she would hide as far away as she could. "Teacher Ji." Luo Nan opened his mouth once more. Ji Qiong shuddered. She really couldn't bear such an overly polite and lofty form of address. "You don't deserve it." "You don't deserve it." Luo Nan didn't care about Ji Qiong's reaction. From his perspective, the educational video he watched in the morning had gone through several hours of filtering. The deepest impression left behind was actually Ji Qiong's long hair, which was like thick smoke. After taking the opportunity to touch it and play with it, it could also be considered a wish. He went straight to the point. There's something very important that I want to ask you. This is a private matter, but I hope you can understand. The more polite Luo Nan was, the more worried Ji Cheong became. She looked at Manager Shaw for help. The latter was also confused, but no matter what, he did not dare to offend Boss Luo. He could only pretend not to see and clumsily turned his head away. A strand of Ji Cheong's hair was still in his grasp. There was nowhere to hide. Luo Nan probed a few times, but Luo Nan still wouldn't let go. He could only respond helplessly, "Boss Luo, you've said your goodbyes." She had already prepared herself to be embarrassed, but no matter how much she maintained her mental defenses, the words that came out of Luo Nan's mouth still stupefied her in the first instant. "How many women have you had sex with recently? Who are they?" Ji Cheong was tongue-tied. Her face turned from red to white, then from white to red. Her head was filled with the dizziness brought about by the blood rushing to her head. Something was stuck in her throat, and she couldn't force it out no matter how hard she tried. Seeing this, Luo Nan expressed his understanding. "I'm sorry. My question was too broad. Tell me, how long have you been in a relationship with Lon Lin? What about He Dong Lu? I know that you had sex with Lon Lin in room 5627 this morning, and your relationship with He Dong Lu was broken off. But before today, did the two of you have any contact? Do you have any understanding of Lon Lin's relationships inside and outside the company? Can you name a few of them? It would be best if they were within the circle. Are you crazy?" 5 or 6 questions came smashing over like a barrage of cannons, directly smashing Ji Cheong's mental defenses. She suddenly moved back, not caring about the strands of hair that were torn. The pain made her lose her composure. Emotions of fear and shame rushed to her head. Her brain heated up, and she fiercely slapped Luo Nan. Luo Nan's fingers, which had been fiddling with his hair a moment ago, firmly grabbed Ji Cheong's wrist before her slap could reach his face. Compared to the slap, Luo Nan didn't use much strength, but the corresponding symbol of restraint and control gave Ji Cheong an excessive psychological impact. Ji Cheong recovered a bit of her ability to think at this time, but the little bit of resources she had was invaded by fear and humiliation. Right now, Luo Nan's side was calm and callous. Manager Shaw's face was stiff. Even Xiao Yu, who was in front of the elevator, turned his head to look back. 5 pairs of eyes stared directly at Ji Cheong. It was as if the bright and beautiful clothes that Ji Cheong was used to were stripped bare in an instant. The face and dignity attached to it were torn to the ground, and then they were ruthlessly trampled on. Ji Cheong's legs went soft. She could no longer stand, but she subconsciously struggled to save herself. She faced Manager Shaw, who she was most familiar with, and screamed, "He's talking nonsense. He's talking nonsense. Hurry up and call for help. Manager Shaw. Hurry up and save me." No matter how much Ji Cheong struggled, Luo Nan's hand remained extremely steady. There was no difference between his hair and his wrist. Luo Nan tried to reason with Ji Cheong, who was excited to the point of insanity. "I know that I wasn't very polite just now, but this information cannot be hidden. Otherwise, it will cause a disaster." Ji Cheong didn't care about a disaster. Right now, she was 100% disaster. She struggled and cried, and her volume was 10 streets louder than Luo Nan's. Luo Nan frowned. Cat Eyes coughed and reminded him, "You can ask in a more private place." Luo Nan shook his head. "The answer must be made public. Let others hear it." Luo Nan's gaze shifted as he spoke. The elevator door 20 meters away had already opened. Little Yu, who should be running errands, did not go in. Instead, he jogged back. "Hey! You guys are going too far. Little you. Even though Manager Shaw approved of Luo Nan's actions 100% in his heart, he was worried that the situation would get out of control and cause an even worse accident. Therefore, he shouted at Luo Nan to stop. Little you didn't pay attention to him at all. He ran faster and faster. Luo Nan gazed at this young man who was filled with righteous indignation. He suddenly spoke, "Go back. Everyone mind their own business." Little you continued to speed up. "Are you taking care of others when you do this?" Bang! The special gun barrel produced electric currents and sound disturbances. The metal bullet was accelerated by electromagnetism before it shot out. It pierced straight through Little Yu's shoulder, and flesh and blood splattered violently in an instant. Little Yu suddenly staggered and leaned to the side. He half knelt on the ground, groaning miserably. "Oh no!" Manager Shaw cried out in alarm. His volume was not much lower than Ji Cheong's. Half a second later, Manager Shaw's screams and his thoughts were both interrupted. He did not understand at all why the situation had suddenly turned out like this. Luo Nan grabbed the stupefied Ji Cheong with one hand while his other hand maintained a firing stance. The electromagnetic gun's muzzle moved down slightly. This time, he locked onto the vital point of Little Yu's back. He Yuan stepped forward without a sound. She used her shoulder to block the muzzle and her figure. She spoke softly. "Get back." At the same time she spoke, Little Yu's low groan came from 10 meters away. His syllables gradually turned clearer. "You're really going too far. Good genes and bad genes are handled by different groups. They're arranged well. But to run into an unreasonable target like you is really bothersome." Though Luo Nan's line of sight was blocked, his senses on the mental plane were more intuitive than his eyes to a certain degree. He listened to the strange sound coming from not too far away. He searched for deeper veins in the surroundings and spoke in passing. "Am I good or bad? Then you really are asking the wrong person. I'm afraid my answer isn't objective." Before his voice faded away, He Yuan suddenly charged forward from above the long corridor. Luo Nan instantly expanded his field of vision, but he still could not see Little Yu's figure. This was because he and He Yuan had collided together in the first instant. It was unknown when, but a cold light flashed in He Yuan's hand. A sharp blade tore through the air, but it did not hit its target. Instead, the shockwave of sonic boom that followed caused the corridor to distort. The shockwave was far too fierce. The density of the air was seriously out of balance. He Yuan and Little Yu entered a state of close combat. Back at Frost River Reality, He Yuan had used the move Kill in 10 steps to instantly kill an Oblatum Knight of the Order of Justice, Ghost Thunder's Arc Light Blade. Unexpectedly, it was completely useless. After 4 consecutive collisions, the sonic boom grew higher and higher. In the end, it turned into a distorted and strange sonic boom that scraped against one's eardrums in pain. Manager Shaw and Ji Cheong fell limply to the ground. They did not even make it through the first wave of impact. It was as if a heavy fist had bombarded their ears. "Hurry up and leave." Cat Eyes pulled Luo Nan to retreat. His opponent's fleshly side ability was at least B rank. The aftermath of the impact possessed sufficient lethality. It was best for them, the mental side, to put some distance between them. Luo Nan did not move. He shook his head and said, "It's over, for now." He Yuan returned to Luo Nan's side as soon as she finished speaking. She withdrew her arc light blade, but her drooping hands were trembling slightly. Chapter 478. The shockwaves of several consecutive head-on collisions had caused serious damage to this exclusive underground passageway. The concrete walls were covered in cracks. The majority of the lighting in the 40-meter area had been destroyed during the battle. The remaining ones quickly experienced short circuits and other malfunctions. The backup elevator also seemed to have a problem. The metal door of the car was jammed due to the deformation of the wall. After a few banging noises, a sharp electronic alarm rang out. It connected with the alarm bells that had been ringing inside the building for a long time. It was noisy to the point of annoyance. The lights in the car were still usable. They were projected from 20 meters away, barely saving the brightness of the long corridor. Hiyuan relied on the severely weakened glimmer to lock onto the ruined body that could hardly be called a human. She swept her gaze around to confirm whether or not the target had the ability to rise again. Behind her, Luo Nan wanted to circle around to take a look, but she stopped him. On the other side, Cat Eyes scratched her chin and made an assessment. So this is the clone body of a rapid catalysis type ability user. If we calculate the explosive power, its peak combat strength is slightly stronger than B rank, but it only has the strength of 4 strikes. In reality, it should be B rank. Even so, it's quite dangerous. At the very least, I would be dead in close combat. Hiyuan shook her head slightly. It has the strength of at least 6 to 7 strikes. But Mr. Luo's first shot destroyed the joints of its shoulder, and I used the format of fire to intentionally increase its explosive power during the fight. I destroyed the activity of its tissues and cells, causing the collapse of its body structure ahead of time. That's why I was able to have this kind of effect. You can't underestimate its self-control and self-defense capabilities. Even though it has certain flaws, it isn't specialized in the fleshly side. It's best not to have this kind of idea. Hiyuan added relevant records as they conversed. She placed them in the mission channel and shared them with all the operation members. Cat Eyes saw how serious she was, so she asked, "Then what about us long-range occupations?" Increase the instantaneous destructive power, especially the joints and the key muscle groups that support the fight. They should be the targets of the first wave of attacks. Of course, the most important thing is to pull away. It doesn't sound too difficult. How's its combat awareness? Hiyuan was silent for a moment before responding. It's similar to an unmanned drone. Artificial intelligence or long-range control? Hiyuan raised her head to look at her. Cat Eyes shrugged. Fine. Pretend I never asked. Luo Nan never spoke while Hiyuan and Cat Eyes were conversing. Though Hiyuan had stopped him from approaching, he was still able to use his naked eyes, mental senses, and many other methods to observe the pile of rotten flesh before him. From his point of view, Cat Eyes had indeed asked a foolish question. To be able to confront a powerhouse like Hiyuan head-on, and under the pressure of her clumsy but skillful means, he was able to accurately judge and intercept the most lethal arc light blades many times, causing them to return in vain. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he wasn't at a disadvantage. There was probably no artificial intelligence that could do this. However, it was not necessarily the case that the controller was focused and going all out. In the time it took for sparks to fly off a flint, Luo Nan truly paid attention to the various traces that flowed past on the mental plane. The operation of the living starry sky and the distortion of the mental curtain were not spared even the slightest change. He had always believed that the person who could make the clone body's empty shell work must be a controller from a certain direction. The facts proved his conjecture. Though the traces were weak and the signs were minuscule, Luo Nan was still able to find a fine transmission path within the dense and complex mental curtain. Though the soul strength transmitted by the opponent wasn't enough to blow even the slightest breeze, it was enough to sense and transmit information. During the process of Hiyuan and the clone body fighting, this information transmission path didn't show any traces of increasing bandwidth or load. It was so stable that it made one's heart palpitate. Luo Nan was unable or unwilling. He chose the latter. This was because the origin of this mental curtain came from the polar domain. Boss, your dog nose is quite sharp. After Cat Eyes finished conversing with Yuan, she slapped Luo Nan's shoulder with force and praised him. It was Luo Nan who gave them a warning after they entered the elevator on the 56th floor. The series of words and actions that followed were all to probe the clone body's reaction and further clarify its target. Though they had yet to capture any direct evidence, they were 100% clear on the opponent's scheme. However, the plethora of coincidences in and of themselves was a powerful proof. So it turns out that the gene exchange not only deals in high-end business, but it also deals in garbage disposal. Cat Eyes turned her gaze back to the two ordinary people. Their lives weren't in danger from the wave of impact just now, but their minds were muddled. Perhaps they would suffer from brain concussions or other sequelae. There's no need to cater to other people's definitions. Yuan confirmed that the clone body couldn't rise again, so she notified the logistics personnel to come over and deal with the aftermath. She turned her attention back to Luo Nan. The clue Mr. Luo found is extremely valuable. Even without direct evidence, it can be seen that the gene exchange maintains a high level of attention towards the current situation of the mutation infection in Xia City. She paused for a moment and said, if Mr. Luo hadn't come to the plaza today and made a new discovery, the opponent's progress would have been above Trigate Securities. Cat Eyes agreed with this judgment. This little you really is a person. It's just that he's been replaced by a clone body. Have you figured out the replacement node yet? Not yet. Mr. Luo. Yuan felt that Luo Nan had been silent for a bit too long, so she deliberately greeted him. Cat Eyes simply hooked onto Luo Nan's arm. She laughed and said, Boss, if this really has something to do with your outsourcing business, then Her Majesty Empress Wu or Trigate Security clearly found the wrong contractor. There must have been no public bidding, right? But how do you know that he's a clone body? It seems that aside from laboratory testing, there aren't any effective methods of distinguishing him. By listening to the sound to determine his position. Luo Nan responded with a low and hoarse voice. Bullshit. That's the truth. Luo Nan had no interest in bickering with Cat Eyes. Right now he appeared to be carefree and relaxed, but he was actually quite exhausted. On one hand, he had to monitor the sound source of the clone body coming from the entire plaza. On the other hand, he had to lock onto the mysterious information channel coming from the polar domain. On the other hand, he had to make a timely response to the plane of reality. Doing three things at once made him quite exhausted. But then again, the two useless words he exchanged with Cat Eyes gave him another inspiration. Since a certain person was so idle, he might as well give her a bit of work. She was unable to monitor the polar domain, and there was no need to make an immediate response to the scene. But as long as the corresponding details and characteristics were clear, she could share the relevant information and act as a monitor. Cat Eyes felt quite bad being covered by his gaze. Luo Nan felt even worse. The fine strand of soul strength was still lingering in the surroundings. It remained in a weak region from beginning to end. It wasn't like President Ouyang's warping of space and time, nor was it like Her Majesty Empress Wu's earth-shattering power. However, maintaining close monitoring of it was an extremely exhausting matter. Luo Nan originally had a wraith sign under his command that specialized in this sort of work. But now that the Darksider species had been sent into the cloud world, and it had even been forcefully planted into the body of a mush-mouth ape, it showed signs of growth and evolution. Luo Nan was unable to call it out no matter how hard he tried. He had no choice but to personally go into battle. He continued to pour resources, and the consumption of his mental strength grew greater and greater. The only thing that could be considered gratifying was that Luo Nan's pure observation mode had made new contributions. Though he had locked onto the opponent didn't have a reciprocal response. The opponent didn't hide too much. And so, Luo Nan slowly came to a realization. The core of this strand of soul strength that came from the polar domain wasn't Yuan. It wasn't Cat Eyes. It wasn't even Luo Nan himself. As for Ji Cheong, Manager Shaw, and the pile of clones that were like rotten meat, none of them were. Its target, Cat Eyes, was a bit impatient from waiting in the dark and noisy hallway. The logistics really took a long time. How about we retreat first? I feel that asking about the romantic history of that long-haired beauty will help boost our spirits and clear our thoughts. Of course, if there's someone who can hear the location and determine the location of all the clones in the municipal plaza, then just pretend I didn't say anything. Luo Nan was quite capable, but the focus of his attention was no longer on that. Cat Eyes withdrew her hand from the crook of his arm at this time. She went to pick up the unconscious Ji Cheong and Manager Shaw. She had the self-awareness of being Luo Nan's assistant. He Yuan didn't raise any objections. After all, guaranteeing Luo Nan's safety was the #1 priority. If Little Yu had really listened and gone upstairs during the fight just now, then no matter how suspicious they were, they wouldn't have taken the risk to make a move. He Yuan arranged a few more details to the logistics team, then indicated to Luo Nan to move. Luo Nan went, "Oh," and slowly began to move. But He Yuan patted his upper arm just as he took a step forward. "Mr. Luo, the gun." "Oh, I forgot." Luo Nan was still holding a one-shot electromagnetic handgun in his hand. The safety was still on right now. He smiled at He Yuan, turned off the safety, and stuffed the gun back into its holster. He Yuan spoke softly, "That shot was very stable. But if you can't confirm the threat level of the target in the first instant, then the restraining effect on the leg is better. It's also fine on the lower abdomen, which can cause sufficient damage. At the same time, if there's a misjudgment, the current medical conditions can save the situation." She paused a bit after speaking to this point, but within 10 meters, a direct hit to the head or chest isn't a problem. "Secretary He, does your family's boss run an assassin company? Speaking of which, is there anyone who can help?" Luo Nan raised his hand, "Give me one. Sister Yue needs to react in time in case something unexpected happens. Don't jinx it. Seeing that you're the boss, I'll give you the long-haired beauty. We can pretend that we didn't see you taking advantage of us." Luo Nan didn't respond to this kind of vulgar joke. He walked over and took Ji Cheong. With his current physique, holding 100 kilograms in one hand was no problem at all. Ji Cheong was still unconscious. Her long hair spilled down, covering half of her charming face. She was delicate and charming. Luo Nan's gaze swept past without pausing. Instead, his gaze paused on the bag by Ji Cheong's feet. "What about their luggage?" "TSK. It's nothing more than cosmetics, performance clothes, and the like. If you're really that kind-hearted, then don't torment her. Are you still hoping for her to go on stage and sing in her current state? Let the logistics pack up." He Yuan stopped the meaningless discussion and indicated for Luo Nan and Cat Eyes to speed up. The three followed the long corridor for another 100 steps before entering the safety passageway. They left the messy battlefield behind them. There wasn't a single person on the long corridor for now. The alarm bell was still ringing, but the lighting of the elevator at the end finally welcomed the fate of short-circuiting. The darkness grew a bit thicker. A sizzling sound seeped out from the ink-like darkness, but it was soon drowned out by the clamor of the alarm bell. But there was a mass of shadow on the ground that wasn't affected at all. It grew from small to large and continued to expand. Soon, it broke through the thin outer layer of bindings and was completely exposed to the air. Then it slid along the ground and directly collided with a wall. After a slight pause, the expanding shadow continued to slide. It was perpendicular to the ground and climbed up along the wall. Buzz. Boom. The powerful sound of electricity, the sound of metal bullets piercing through the air, and the sound of flesh piercing rang out. It was as if the expanding shadow had been struck by lightning. Its body, which had already begun to take shape, instinctively contracted violently with the location of the bullet as the core. And at this time, the sound of piercing through the air rang out from the other end of the long corridor. Someone used their powerful arm strength to throw a specially made flare over here. The powerful light tore apart the dark curtain of the long corridor, completely exposing the scene beneath the curtain of darkness. Fine details were revealed. On the floor of the long corridor was the backpack that Xiao Yu had carried during the fierce battle. The backpack had been flung away before the fierce battle, but it had already burst open. The junk inside was scattered all over the ground, and there were even specks of mucus on the surface. And above the backpack, a lump of deformed flesh was stuck to the wall. The outer layer of mucus was wrapped in a layer of mucus. This was the source of the mucus on the backpack. It was hard to find a reference object to describe its ugly appearance, not to mention that it was currently twitching violently. It looked to be in extreme pain. Luo Nan, He Yuan, and Cat Eyes walked out from the entrance of the safety passageway. They looked at the strange scene in the distance under the interweaving of powerful light and shadows. Cat Eyes was very astonished. The format of fire can enchant bullets. It was very clear that she had gone off topic. He Yuan's brows were locked tight. She held the electromagnetic handgun in her hand. The gun was Luo Nan's, but she was the one who had fired the gun. The effect looked decent, but it was of no help in explaining the current situation. Luo Nan squinted his eyes and carefully observed the ugly lump of flesh in the distance. His observation strength was quite strong on the mental plane. He even borrowed the society's database to search, but he was still unable to find the origin of this thing. He was also unable to figure out what it was used for. Right now, the flesh on the wall seemed to have suffered heavy injuries. Its body was clearly shriveled, and viscous fluids flowed out from the place where its body was stuck to the wall. Under the powerful light of the flare, an extremely bizarre silver-gray color appeared. The viscous fluids flowed down from the wall. Some of them seeped into the cracks in the wall that had just formed, but most of them flowed to the ground. They continued to spread under the tension. As this process progressed, the silver-gray luster, which originally had a metallic texture, gradually dimmed. Its surface became coarse, and it was gradually covered with a layer of fine velvet. A pathogenic strain. A biochemical weapon. He Yuan and Cat Eyes spoke at the same time. But He Yuan pulled the trigger once more as she spoke. The powerful magnetic field generated by the electromagnetic coil propelled the metal bullet out of the muzzle. A distance of 60 meters was not worth mentioning under the initial speed of 5 times the speed of sound. The bullet seemed to have just left the muzzle when it pierced diagonally into the mucus-covered wall. Chapter 479. Seeing the effects of He Yuan's gunshot, Cat Eyes was truly shocked. "Are you a mage?" Luo Nan shouted. "The enemy has cut off the wiring within the wall. It's guiding the electricity." Before Luo Nan's voice fell, the leaping electrical fire had already covered the entire area of mucus. The dense bacterial strains on the surface instantly began to grow crazily, causing the mucus area to be like boiling porridge. Bubbles rose one after the other. Half a second later, a grayish-white shadow the size of 2 knuckles pounced out of one of the bubbles that exploded. Cat Eye's mental senses were not given for nothing. She immediately confirmed the species of the target that had suddenly appeared. Rats. With the appearance of the first rat came a string of similar short-living creatures. They came in an unending stream, seemingly endless and inexplicably strange. They were small in size, but they shouldn't be things that could be concealed by a layer of mucus. Many of them were flesh-colored larvae within the spreading rat swarm. But after staggering a few steps, their fur gradually grew and their skin turned gray. Their exceptionally sharp incisors flickered with a cold light. Squeaking sounds interweaved with ear-piercing alarm bells, making one's scalp go numb. Cat Eyes looked as if she was watching a clumsy sci-fi drama. After these bacterial strains mature, they directly breed rats. How many links are there in the middle? What about nutrition? What about energy? Guiding electricity. Absorbing energy and transforming it. Yuan found an explanation. It might not be correct, but there was no need to get to the bottom of things at this time. More importantly, the enemy spawned this rat swarm. What were they trying to do? Soon, the movements of the rat tide became clear. They didn't launch an assault. Instead, they scattered and fled in all directions after touching the ground. There were rats in every direction and their movements were swift and nimble. The three were stunned for a moment. Yuan was the first to react. Gene samples. The answer was a bit jumpy, but Luo Nan and Cat Eyes understood in an instant. Since Little Yu was in charge of collecting inferior genes, perhaps he had already obtained some results and was carrying them with him. Now that the clone had collapsed and the mission was interrupted, the early gains were at risk of becoming a wedding dress for others. Of course, they had to try to cut their losses. Luo Nan and the others were not too clear on how the enemy carried the gene samples through the rats. But they destroyed whatever the enemy did. Such a train of thought was most likely correct. Luo Nan's train of thought was clear, and he discovered a few new circumstances. Some of them passed through the cracks in the wall. Originally, with the degree of cracks in the wall, the rats wouldn't be able to pass through, but these catalyzed clone bombs showed corresponding capabilities. The young rats in front of them that had yet to fully grow exploded. After a few waves of explosions, they forcefully widened the crack and opened up a path of flesh and blood, giving their brethren space to escape. In this way, in front of the wall, behind the wall, and in every corner, there were shadows of rats leaping about. It made people dizzy, and they couldn't even count the number for a while. Boom. The loud bang and the explosion happened at the same time on the cracked wall. The side wall of the reinforced concrete instantly broke open. Gravel flew everywhere and dust flew everywhere. The rats that had just broken out were instantly crushed into pieces by such a powerful explosion. The ugly meat patty that had been crawling along the wall was also hard-pressed to escape. Its entire body was torn into several pieces, and its silver-gray body fluid sprayed out. But most of it evaporated into nothingness within the flames. In the next moment, an exoskeleton armor strode in through the hole in the wall. It was painted with a special azure color like the sea, and it had a fully sealed helmet with multiple edges. It showed that this was a deep blue walker. In a certain sense, it represented the highest combat power of an official soldier of the world government. The one controlling the deep blue walker was God. After breaking through the wall, the distorted flames around his body spread out, covering the rat tide in all directions. He used the format of fire to deal fatal damage to these suspected carriers of the gene samples. This was the mantis stalking the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. Or perhaps it should be said that this was the embodiment of the importance of the reserve team. Yuan had sent the two bodyguards to drive the car when they had just exited the elevator earlier. In fact, it was a code to activate the deep blue walkers. The two former elite burners of the military were C rank at most in terms of their unarmored abilities. They could wear the deep blue walkers, and part of their abilities could enter the B rank range. They were enough to hold their own. Yuan didn't reveal her two trump cards even when she was fighting with Little Yu. It would be a lot easier to mobilize them now. Do a complete sweep. Collect. Don't let go of any body tissue. Yuan naturally raised the level of treatment once again after this incident. God acted according to his orders. Before the logistics team arrived, he would first do the cleaning. However, the situation just now was far too treacherous. It exceeded common sense. After he collected a few pieces of the ugly meat pie, he couldn't restrain himself for once. He took the initiative to ask in the mission channel, "Vice President, is this a nest? You've seen one before. Yes. I've seen one when I was carrying out a mission in District 87. Later, I used the main laser cannon on the ship to eliminate it. District 87. That's a mature body. You're saying that what we see right now is a nest larva? Cat Eyes was unwilling to be left out. She joined the discussion. A nest? Luo Nan actually knew the relevant general knowledge, but he had to wait for the others to expose it before he connected the theory with reality. He cast his gaze toward the last remaining piece of meat pie on the ground. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, it would be very hard to imagine that this was the legendary factory that produced low-end mutants. It was the fatal source of the genetic pollution of the era of distortion. The so-called nest was something that only appeared in the middle of the era of distortion. It was said to be the product of the Earth's natural environment being completely distorted. It was a deformed biological factory. It was like a methane pool of mutant nature. It gathered countless DNA fragments, causing them to collide and combine with each other to finally produce large amounts of mutant creations. The vast majority of these nest larvae possessed serious genetic defects when compared to the early natural mutants. Moreover, they would soon become food for the surrounding vicious beasts. But it was in this form that the mutant DNA fragments spread throughout the world like a plague. It was said that these DNA fragments had strong expressions and were very difficult to completely degrade. The powerful mutants wouldn't be fatally affected, but it was like burying a ticking time bomb for the surviving normal birds and beasts and the vagrants of the wilderness. Due to the rapid spread of large amounts of mutant DNA, the world government had entered an active defense phase 40 years after the mutant calamity. The species of mutants throughout the world continued to rise without end. It had to be said that this was greatly related to the appearance of the nest. Moreover, no one was able to say for the time being what effect these large amounts of foreign genes would have under the current genetic background. But the academic community basically held a pessimistic attitude. He Yueyin had asserted in class that the lingering poison brought by the nest wouldn't be apparent to humans within 1 or 2 generations. But as the population continued to multiply, the mutant DNA would play a more and more important role in the genetic process of the race. This was, without a doubt, an era of genetic pollution. Before the Third World War, there were approximately 10 million species and 1 billion genes on Earth. But 40 years after the war, not counting the mutants, the number of native species had sharply decreased to 700,000. Over 2/3 of the genes could only be seen in the gene library. It was also during these 40 years that the government lost control over the wilderness, which led to the complete loss of control over gene flow and other phenomena. In many regions, foreign genes already occupied an absolute dominant position. This was tantamount to a historical extinction of a species. Luo Nan recalled the knowledge he had learned and combined it with the situation that had just occurred. He spoke in a low voice, "This nest. It's artificial, right? Artificial nest. The gene exchange has this kind of technology. Let's create artificial wombs. With this kind of technology, he can forcefully enter the Star Alliance Committee. He'll be the leader of the world later." Cat Eye's words could be said to be an agreement, but not an agreement. She could be said to be refuting, but not refuting. She sounded a bit guilty and weak. Facts speak louder than words. Luo Nan personally witnessed the information pathway from the polar domain pour relevant power and information into the closed bottle openings of his backpack. The relevant cell tissues were stimulated and mixed with each other. Then the ugly meat patty swelled and the rat horde was born. The entire process was bizarre but clear. Clearly, the other party possessed methods and abilities that exceeded common sense. Otherwise, Luo Nan would have pulled He Yueyin and Cat Eyes along with him to attack. The Deep Blue Walker under God's control had already completed its initial harvesting in the long corridor that had already changed beyond recognition. It was walking over here. Luo Nan suddenly thought of something at this time. Check Ji Cheong's bag as well. That little Yu has also emptied his hands. God just happened to walk over to the bag. He picked it up when he heard Luo Nan's words, but he felt that something was wrong the moment he touched it. The side of the bag that was pressed against the ground appeared quite damp. It had already been soaked with some sort of liquid. And there was a tiny crack on the corresponding ground. It should have been caused by the aftermath of He Yueyin and Little Yu's battle. There was absolutely no liquid leaking out just now. Luo Nan was certain. He had discovered that there was a problem with Little Yu's backpack, so he had also monitored Ji Cheong's backpack. He had been paying attention to the internal situation before the rat tide arrived. This was also when the rat tide erupted from the nest. Luo Nan's entire attention was shifted over to determine the rat tide's formation pattern and escape trajectory. That's right. Something must have happened at that time. God tore open the bag in one go to confirm the situation inside. But Luo Nan didn't need to look to know. One of the cosmetic bottles is broken. The others are all intact. Luo Nan walked over there as he spoke. He Yueyin hesitated for a moment, but she didn't stop him. She quickly followed. Was this a diversion? Then the information was leaked and shifted. Luo Nan pursed his lips. His expression was grim. He felt a bit embarrassed. Everything was clearly within his grasp. The other party didn't detect his observation at all, but they still used ruthless methods to play him. Any opponent that came from the polar domain really couldn't be underestimated. The building's security personnel and the society's logistics team arrived at practically the same time at this time. After a short negotiation, the logistics team relied on the tiger skin of government authority to send the security personnel away. They quickly gathered over here. Luo Nan stood next to the deep blue walker, who was taller than him by half a body. He didn't look at the bag. He just stared at the crack on the ground. It seemed that he wanted to see flowers from within. In reality, he had locked onto the soul strength that came from the polar domain. The other party was still lingering in the surrounding area. It seemed that he hadn't finished. Fine. Actually, he was observing Luo Nan in secret. He was probably very interested in Luo Nan. Chapter 480. At 6:20 in the evening, the rehearsal ended in the municipal plaza. The performance was about to officially begin. During the warm-up period, the hundreds of thousands of people in the plaza roared like a tsunami. Even underground, one could feel the slight vibrations. Luo Nan and his group entered the underground parking lot of the Tonghui building at this time. They sat in a dark-colored special police transport vehicle. Since it was specially designed for special police officers wearing exoskeleton armor, the vehicle was quite large. Gao De and Si Guoxing maintained their deep blue walker equipment and sat upright in the vehicle. It was still quite spacious. He Yueyin communicated with the logistics team and turned around. She walked into the back of the vehicle and closed the door. Then the vehicle started. The samples collected in advance have already been delivered to the Shangding building. No interceptions. Unmanned drones. Cat Eyes was very baffled. The other party is quite patient. Could it be that the gene samples have already been sent out? So these bits and pieces are meaningless. How's the plaza? All targets have been locked in. The follow-up plans need to be evaluated. The two ladies exchanged a few words and turned their gazes to Luo Nan at the same time. Luo Nan was daydreaming. Cat Eyes glanced at him. Are you mute? Luo Nan still did not respond. Right now he and the visitor from the polar domain were in a marvelous state of equilibrium. The visitor had locked onto Luo Nan's body and was observing his every movement. Luo Nan was aware of the visitor's observing actions, but the visitor was completely unaware of it. It was hard to say who had the upper hand in such a situation. Luo Nan's level was a bit higher in terms of the realm of observation. But in terms of reality, he had fallen into a completely passive situation. He wanted to trace back several times, but he was interrupted every time. This was because he had bumped into a few clones scattered across the plaza several times in a row. Luo Nan would have been very happy if he had done this an hour earlier. But right now his psychic bat wave covered the entire living starry sky. The information he sent back included all the clones within a 20-kilometer radius under his surveillance. The information overlapped with each other, greatly reducing the value of the information. At most, it could serve as a verification. Well, this also proved that the visitors' methods were quite similar to Luo Nan's. They both used some kind of medium as a transfer station to realize the ultra-long distance transmission of information. Luo Nan had his believers, and the visitor had his clones. It was very fair. The surveillance and anti-surveillance states were maintained in this sort of equilibrium. Luo Nan believed that he had suffered a bit of a loss, but if he wanted to sever the enemy's surveillance, then he would need to eliminate all the clone bodies in the vicinity of the plaza. And that was clearly impossible. It was inconvenient for Luo Nan to directly report this matter to He Yuan and Cat Eyes. This was to prevent them from sensing any abnormalities and losing their only technical advantage. In that case, leaving was the best choice. Yes, right now Luo Nan didn't reject the idea of leaving the municipal square and heading to the Xiangding building at all. That visitor from the polar domain had spread the clone body of an ability user, controlled the nest, and sensed and monitored them from a distance. Every one of his methods was strange and unfathomable, and it was obvious that he didn't intend to keep a low profile. If these problems were transferred to the performance stage, then it was really possible that several 100,000 people would explode into the sky tonight. This was a consequence that Luo Nan could not afford to bear no matter what. Luo Nan remained silent, and Cat Eyes and He Yuan no longer urged him. They were beginning to get used to Luo Nan's style. After a long period of silence and observation, shocking words would most likely come out of their mouths. But before that, they still had to do some work. Cat Eyes looked at the real-time updated information in the mission channel. Right now, the people who are likely to be listed as having inferior genes have already been kicked out of the performance team. And they are all being investigated. Oh right, that dandy brother of yours is also among the suspects. He Yuan gave a simple answer. It's already been taken care of. Cat Eyes chuckled. Eliminating hidden dangers to the greatest extent was a smart move. As for whether or not tonight's performance would be able to proceed in its entirety, it was not within the scope of their concern. Luo Nan agreed with this point. After truly facing the enemy, his previous thoughts of taking care of them all felt childish when he thought about it. Right now, he would rather cause a bit of trouble and have tonight's performance cut in half. No matter what, he had to keep his family and friends far away from the source of danger. In the conflict between his ideals and his life, he would choose the latter. At the very least, he would not suffer a loss. Right now, the special police transport vehicle had already left the security control area of the municipal square. Gauda asked He Yuan for instructions. The traffic congestion index above ground is quite high. Should we take the underground route? K-12 tunnel. A temporary passage has already been marked out there. Cat Eyes asked, where are we going? Helipad 76 of the King of Science Communications building. We'll ride the flying shuttle there and transfer through the high-altitude traffic layer. Cat Eyes went, oh. She was no longer interested. She continued to look at the information. Soon, she discovered a new problem. Does the enemy have eyes in Trigate security? According to the diagram drawn by the boss, there are currently clones appearing in the vicinity of several monitoring targets of Trigate security. What did Her Majesty Empress Wu say? Actually, it was more direct to have Luo Nan and Peony, these two frontline intelligence agents, communicate with each other. Luo Nan had previously thought that even if Her Majesty Empress Wu knew of this matter, she would most likely arrange for Peony to coordinate with them. But should they uncover their identities as partners? Just the thought of that situation made Luo Nan feel awkward. However, the feedback He Yueyin received was more or less unexpected. Her Majesty Empress Wu said that Trigate Security terminated the commission contract with the firm 10 minutes ago and settled the commission. Right now, it's very hard for us to find a reason to get involved through this channel. The contract was terminated. Cat Eyes cast her gaze once more at Luo Nan. Though Luo Nan had yet to speak, he displayed astonishment. He had once heard Peony say that Trigate Security might shrink back, but he never expected them to shrink back this quickly. If the factor of the gene exchange wasn't taken into account, just the so-called shady dealings in the entertainment circle was enough to make Trigate Security, which had a military background, retreat. Such a big reaction. It's either lack of confidence or a lack of confidence. Maybe. But digging up information is a matter for the future. Right now, we still need to ensure that Mr. Luo safely returns to the Shangding building. Then what about the gene exchange and the nest? This is the center of Xia City. It turns out that someone can place a mutant nest anywhere in the vicinity at any time. Share the pressure together. Join hands to solve the problem. He Yueyin's attitude was like that of a seasoned politician, but Cat Eyes liked it very much. They'll go crazy. A call came in before she could finish speaking. He Yueyin picked up the call and greeted calmly, "Hello." The conversation was very simple. It ended very quickly. He Yueyin gave a slight explanation when faced with Cat Eye's curious gaze. A company responsible for the security of the municipal plaza is asking for information. They directly contacted you. This company has eyes and ears all over the world. Yes, Sky Blue Security. The one under Quantum Corporation. Cat Eyes and He Yueyin cast their gazes at Luo Nan, but Luo Nan still didn't have any reaction. Luo Nan knew that Sky Blue Security was nearby long ago from Peony. What he was concerned about right now was when he would be able to completely extricate himself from the enemy's clone body node monitoring network. Right now, the transport vehicle had already passed the outermost node. The distance between them grew larger and larger. There should be a limit to the extension of the enemy's soul strength. 700 meters. 800 meters. 900 meters. It was broken off. Amazing. The range of his senses could extend to nearly a kilometer by relying on a single node. According to Luo Nan's own experience, the difference in the observation radius of the main body and the node was around 10 times. If he didn't have the living starry sky as an observation mode, it would be pretty good if he could reach 100 meters purely by relying on his mental senses. Being far away from such a powerful person gave Luo Nan a feeling of relaxation. It was as if he had come out from deep water. It was as if he had rushed out from the encirclement of mosquitoes and bees. It was refreshing and bright. Luo Nan unconsciously let out a breath. Cat Eyes looked at him. "You really are abnormal." Luo Nan grunted. Since he was already free, he could talk about some things. "I just felt like someone was spying on me." He Yueyin and Cat Eyes would have to consider these words if they were spoken by someone else. However, the words came from the mouth of Luo Nan, an expert in mental senses. The meaning was completely different. Now, Cat Eyes' body suddenly went taut. She was still able to use her mental senses to scan the surrounding environment within the sealed vehicle. Of course, she didn't discover anything. Right now, the transport vehicle was moving through the flow of traffic in the underground lane. Its appearance was quite eye-catching, but it was very difficult to follow and observe it. He Yueyin asked, "When did it start?" "It's been a while. Maybe it was after we fought." "It's a lot better now." Her mouth said maybe, but she was certain in her heart. As an expert in the mental side, she had this advantage. She could push everything to an illusory feeling. God reported in a timely manner, "There's still 400 meters until we enter the exclusive passageway." Yuan gazed at Luo Nan for a moment, then contacted the staff of the society. She issued an order a few seconds later. Execute according to the original plan. After the order was issued, the transport vehicle began to change lanes. It headed toward an underground tunnel that was marked as forbidden to pass through. The indicator light of the tunnel automatically turned green when the vehicle arrived 30 meters before the tunnel. The authority verification was passed. A second later, the transport vehicle drove into the interior of the tunnel. There were no other vehicles other than the transport vehicle in the two-lane tunnel. It was spacious and unobstructed. This tunnel led directly to the internal passageway of Ke Wang's communications building. According to the plan, they would be able to reach Apron 76 in at most 5 minutes. But Luo Nan suddenly felt a change at this time. The refreshing feeling of being free of pressure suddenly vanished, and the corresponding feeling of being spied on came. And it wasn't the kind of clear directional observation from before. Instead, it was a directionless, oppressive feeling of danger everywhere. It was completely unknown where it came from. The transport vehicle drove into the interior of the building. The two-lane road ahead turned into a single lane, and the speed of the vehicle slowed down accordingly. This was a freight passageway that led directly to Apron 76. With the level of Luo Nan's mental senses, he could already sense the activated flying shuttle and the security personnel in the surroundings. The problem was that the terrible feeling of being spied on grew stronger and stronger. Or perhaps it could be said that it was no longer spying on him. It was an offensive type of oppression. It was like an enemy brimming with malice had come to bully him. Oh, there was a subtle difference. It was like. Chapter 481. A trembling sensation swept across his skin like a wave. From his scalp to his fingertips, it was as if he had been electrified. Luo Nan's mental senses and the living starry sky were simultaneously activated by this stimulation. They broke through the cramped passageway and extended and danced within the complex environment of the building. He was like a spider spinning a web, or a bat emitting sound waves. But Yuan suddenly said to the side, "Someone's catching up to us." Luo Nan raised his head in a daze. He didn't understand how Yuan's senses were more timely and accurate than his. Someone has intruded into the tunnel without permission. Yuan added a reason. Then the surveillance footage was shared in the mission channel. Luo Nan saw a young man who seemed to be a hip-hop biker. He was riding his high-horsepower motorcycle, rumbling as he charged into the private tunnel. Since he didn't possess legal authority, his own wristband issued him a stern warning. The young man didn't react to this at all. The speed of the motorcycle he was riding on suddenly dropped in the next moment. The SCA's AI system had taken over the motorcycle. The direction and throttle were locked down. The motorcycle's speed began to drop rapidly until it came to a complete stop. But the young biker had no expression on his face. He just got off the motorcycle. Not only did he abandon the motorcycle, he even tore off his wristband and threw it away. Then he ran madly towards the depths of the tunnel. Of course, the most important thing was the zero feedback from the living starry sky. This made Luo Nan instantly understand the identity of this person. Ability user's clone body. 3 seconds later, the people on the transport vehicle saw this young biker begin to crazily run alone at a speed of over 60 kilometers per hour. Moreover, as time passed, his speed continued to increase. In the end, he only used about a minute to force his way into the building's cargo passageway. As for the passageway being closed due to the unauthorized opening, the biker smashed in with a single punch. The cargo passageway already had an upward slope at this time. The young biker's figure leaned forward. Later on, he simply used both his hands and feet. He was like a vicious wolf on the hunt, more like a human. Speed of 90 kilometers per hour. Estimated contact in 75 seconds. God didn't ask if they should speed up. This was because the current situation was that even if they accelerated to tarmac 76, this hungry wolf in human form would have ample time to block the group of people before they boarded the plane. Fighting a battle on the tarmac would only fulfill the other side's wishes. Cat eyes furrowed her brows as she looked at Hiyuain. This kind of speed consumes an enormous amount of energy. With this rate of consumption, if he can still maintain his combat strength, he should be much stronger than little Yu. Hiyuain's gaze turned to Luo Nan. Mr. Luo, what do you mean? The straight-line distance between the two was less than a kilometer as they spiraled upward through the passageway. There was no need for the living starry sky to intervene. They had entered the range of Luo Nan's mental senses. Luo Nan carefully observed for a while, but in the end he could only shake his head individually. I don't feel any changes. But... The overall atmosphere is terrible. Luo Nan really could not think of a more accurate description. Although the most threatening target had already appeared, in his eyes, this biker gang was only the tip of a spear. Behind him, there was a huge curtain of darkness that had already spread out, and it was gradually shrinking. However, his psychic senses and the living starry sky still couldn't capture its exact shape. Hiyuain nodded in understanding, then ordered, delay the interception. God opened the back door of the transport vehicle the moment the order was issued. He tossed out a few tactical grenades in succession, including a powerful defensive grenade. The grenade had a delay and remote control function set. Due to the large curvature and slope of the passageway, the grenade rumbled as soon as it hit the ground. The biker gang on the other side of the passageway seemed to be unaware of this. They continued to advance like a hurricane. Hiyuain didn't wait for the result. She walked straight to the front of the vehicle and stuck her back to the metal partition. Simple mechanical arms extended out from both sides as the scanning light fell. They stuck to Hiyuain's body, installing and splicing metal components together. If one only looked at Hiyuain, the metal components were like a special life form. They followed along her body, spreading up and down. They extended from her shoulders to her chest, her arms, her waist, her legs, and finally covered her face. This was undoubtedly the exoskeleton armor of a deep blue walker. This was the first time Luo Nan saw the entire process of a deep blue walker being armed. He was a bit stupefied for a time. The entire process was extremely quick. In the end, it didn't take more than 15 seconds. The current Hiyuain had already transformed into a vicious killing machine armed with steel. The special metal on her body reacted with the format of fire, producing a sea-like deep blue radiance. It also seemed to have a rhythm of breathing, gorgeous and dazzling. Hiyuain walked down the equipment platform after the exoskeleton was properly installed. She instructed in a deep voice, Plan number 4. Abandon the vehicle if necessary. God and Si Guisheng responded in unison. Hiyuain nodded to Luo Nan once more. She then pushed open the door of the vehicle and leaped up gracefully. She flipped to the top of the vehicle and crouched down quietly. Yes. No one believed that a few tactical grenades could eliminate the biker gang behind them. The battle had yet to begin. Another 20 seconds or so passed before a muffled explosion rang out in the lane. The tactical grenades that had slid down exploded one after another, including the most destructive defensive grenades. The shrapnel covered the entire passageway in an instant, causing the area to become unrecognizable. The surveillance camera was destroyed in an instant as well. The shared image of the mission channel was cut off. But before the image was cut off, everyone saw the biker gang's body slam to the side. Before the tactical grenades could unleash their killing power, the biker gang had forcibly smashed through a wall to the other side of the lane. The biker gang's speed increased explosively once more as soon as his hands and feet landed on the ground. It was so fast that it was hard for the high-definition camera to capture his figure. Luckily, Luo Nan reacted at this time. He promptly took over the surveillance mission and warned everyone, 400 meters. 300 meters. 200 meters, he suddenly let out a muffled groan. A mental attack that came from an unknown direction exploded over, distorting his mental senses. It was as if a dark curtain had covered his head and face, causing him to lose his lock onto the target for a short period of time. The attack came suddenly, but compared to Luo Nan's powerful accumulation of soul strength, it was just like smashing a rock in the center of the lake. Though it was turbulent, it was fundamentally unhindered. Luo Nan quickly recovered. Then another loud rumble rang out in front of the moving transport vehicle within this buffer space. The wall burst open and a huge amount of cement and baffle fragments splashed out with a whooshing sound. He Yuan, who was on top of the vehicle, pounced towards the area the moment the wall burst open. Her entire body was like a sharp blade piercing through the air under the auxiliary acceleration of the exoskeleton. The driver and co-driver were both elites of Luo Nan's security team. Things happened in a rush, but they were busy and not chaotic. The transport vehicle suddenly moved to the side, but it was unavoidable for it to crash into a wall on the other side due to the narrow lane. The vehicle rubbed against the wall, creating patches of sparks, but the vehicle continued to rumble forward. Luo Nan and Cat Eye's level of physical skills were displayed within the vehicle. Though the vibration was endless, the two were able to maintain their balance. God and Guishing adopted defensive postures, ensuring that the equipment and junk within the vehicle wouldn't cause damage to the two unarmored personnel, 47 km/h. Careful! The transport vehicle, which had been moving at a speed of close to 50 km/h, suddenly dropped to zero before Luo Nan's voice could fall. The sound of an explosion reached their ears. It was sharp and had a strange inflection to it. At this moment, a force squeezed over from the side. The terrifying force slammed the vehicle, which weighed several tons, into the wall. The vehicle didn't move an inch within a second. The only ones who were shaken were Luo Nan's group within the vehicle. The power of inertia was terrifying. The driver and co-driver in front were pushed forward by the powerful force in the first instance. Even though they were wearing seatbelts, it was hard to avoid colliding with the steering wheel and the control console. They were instantly injured. Even if Luo Nan's horse stance was 10 times more solid within the vehicle, it would be impossible for him to stabilize his figure at this time. He and Cat Eyes threw themselves forward, and a dazzling electric fire exploded in front of them. The simple deep blue walker equipment was the first to explode. The bursting fragments welcomed their arrival. At this time, God and Guishing, the two deep blue walkers, exerted force at the same time. The format of fire transformed into a translucent flaming blade that chopped down towards the vehicle's baffle in front. The metal baffle ruptured and the upper part of the driver's compartment exploded into pieces. God and Guishing forcibly chopped down the obstruction in front of them, opening up a path to dispel the power of inertia. Luo Nan and Cat Eyes flew out of the vehicle as if they were riding on clouds and mist. They flew out of the driver's compartment that was beyond recognition, and the temperature within the vehicle rapidly rose the instant they left the vehicle. This was not the power of the format of fire. The powerful and malevolent source of heat came from outside the vehicle. In that instant, the special police transport vehicle, which was molded from high-strength alloy, seemed to deform in the high temperature of the air. God and Guishing slashes were meant to help the driver and co-driver break free, but the two's reactions were a step too slow. They screamed miserably within the suddenly rising temperature of the air. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. Luo Nan's mind was still clear. Or perhaps it could be said that he had entered his peak state under the high-intensity stimulation. He landed on the ground with a standard quick recover under God's protection. He rolled a few times before getting up. When he looked back, he saw Yuan fighting with the biker gang. But the feeling of this scene was completely different from when he had fought against Xiao Yu earlier. It was as if an incorporeal furnace had been set up outside the biker gang's body. Surging streams of heat roiled and churned within. Their fighting style had completely changed. Luo Nan was no longer using his fleshly body to erupt. Instead, he used his fleshly body as a fulcrum to pry up an enormous amount of energy and change the form of energy to deal damage to the target. This was similar to the burner in this aspect. They were both a branch of the fleshly body, but it was an extremely high-end type. Of all the ability users that Luo Nan had encountered, only Fairchild's Shield of Truth was similar to this situation, aside from the burner. In addition, Mo Luan's dark soul body involved the interference and transformation of the mental into the material. Though the nature was different, the characteristics were quite similar. Chapter 482. No matter what level of power the opponent was, the opponent must have learned from the lesson with Xiao Yu last time by changing his fighting style. He must have avoided self-destruction due to the extreme eruption of his fleshly body. But Luo Nan always felt that it was not that simple. After all, consumption was consumption, no matter what kind of consumption it was. It was all paid out by this fleshly body. True ability users were able to obtain a longer standby time due to the coordination of body and soul. The mind and fleshly body interfered with each other. There was a rhythm to mediate between the rise and fall. This was the natural weakness of the clone body, but the opponent must have used some sort of method to make up for it. Luo Nan felt that it was extremely odd from the beginning. On the surface, it was a motorcycle gang. But behind the motorcycle gang, an incorporeal net had long since spread open. A turbid curtain of darkness was propped up, and the thing that formed the curtain of darkness seemed to be drawing closer. Luo Nan didn't have much time to observe. Cat Eyes grabbed him and walked up the ramp. Si Guisheng was in front and God was behind, providing cover. Behind them, the motorcycle gang and Yuan's battle had already smashed the upper and lower passageways full of holes. The electrical circuits and lighting equipment were the first to suffer. Under the powerful impact of the furnace-style heat, the degree of destruction was more thorough than at the Tonghui building. Soon, this cargo passageway could only be illuminated by the deep blue walker's body and the bursting flames of the battle. The battlefield where the two experts fought was not limited to the cargo passageway. Yuan's deep blue walker's arclight blade burst out as Luo Nan's group ran wildly toward the parking apron. It forced the motorcycle gang to break through the outer wall and into the office area on the right side of the cargo passageway. And a short second later, the roaring heat wave tore apart another wall. It practically scraped God's helmet, collapsing the back of the passageway into ruins. Fortunately, today was the weekend. It was late, and there were few people in the building. No one suffered for the time being. But if this were to continue, it would only be a matter of time before the entire building was destroyed, considering the aftermath of the battle between Tian Bang and Mo Luan a few days ago. Why do I always encounter this kind of freak who demolishes everything with his bare hands when I'm with you? Cat Eyes' breathing became a bit hurried. The temperature within the passageway kept rising. The consumption of physical strength was secondary. What was worse was the chaotic aura that shuttled back and forth. It constantly stimulated and interfered with her. It was extremely troublesome for an ability user like her who specialized in mental senses. Luo Nan kept his head down and didn't say anything. He just sprinted with 1 foot high and 1 foot low. Just when Cat Eyes thought that her complaints would not be heard again, a voice suddenly rang in her ears. Did you see that? Ah. They're all here, and they're very fast. They must have used some sort of concealment method just now. Hey, speak clearly. Luo Nan turned his head to look at her. He was finally able to get a bit out of his own logic. I'm saying, 70 meters away, inside the ventilation duct. Yes, the one on the left. 70 meters just so happened to be within the range of Cat Eye's mental senses. She focused her attention and quickly discovered her target. Rat. Not only were they rats, but they were also identical to the nest-born rats in the Tonghui building's underground tunnel. The largest one was no bigger than 2 or 3 knuckles. Its entire body was gray and it had sharp teeth and claws. At this time, there were 7 or 8 rats like this in the ventilation duct. They were moving quickly in the duct like a gray stream. Also, these gray rats did not only appear in the left ventilation duct. Under Luo Nan's reminder, Cat Eyes discovered that several hundred similar rats had already been stuffed into the surroundings of the cargo corridor they were in at some unknown time within the range of her mental senses. They appeared in various areas of the cargo corridor up, down, left, and right. Most importantly, there was still an unending stream of rats pouring in, indicating that there were many, many more in the periphery. Has this place already been installed with a nest? Maybe. Maybe it's more than that. It's still that ventilation duct. Look further ahead. At this time, Cat Eyes' long-range sensing ability came into play. She took advantage of the situation to reduce the range of her all-encompassing senses. She extended the length of her soul strength probing feelers. Under Luo Nan's guidance, she extended it all the way to 200 meters, all the way to the entrance of the same floor as the ventilation duct. Along the way, she saw at least 4 or 5 bloodstains and meat paste smeared within the duct. From the scope and details of the contamination in these few locations, she could tell that there were at least 3 to 5 rats in each location. Their bodies had exploded and flesh and blood splattered everywhere. What does this mean? Just as Cat Eyes was observing from afar, another explosion rang out from within the cargo passageway. He Yuan and the biker gang carried out another wave of collision. A terrifying energy jet destroyed the structure of the passageway within a radius of 20 meters, causing a small-scale collapse. The flying rubble smashed against the god exoskeleton armor at the back, producing banging sounds. Luo Nan requested Cat Eyes to pay attention. Look over there. Look at these rats. There was no need for Luo Nan's reminder right now. Cat Eyes could see at least 20 rats within the range of her senses. They instantly exploded in every direction, flesh and blood splattering everywhere. But soon, several times the number of rats came in from various passageways to replenish their numbers. Consumables, and their scapegoats. The connection between the clone body and the rats is quite tight. The range and depth of Luo Nan's senses surpassed Cat Eyes by quite a bit. Earlier, his senses had been disrupted by the opponent using some sort of method, causing him to lose his sensitivity. But now that the two sides were in direct confrontation, the disruptive dark screen had lost its effectiveness. He quickly captured the internal connections between the numerous matters from beginning to end. From his perspective, the wave upon wave of the rat tide was the most crucial key to victory and defeat in this entire battle. Between them and the motorcycle gang, there were thousands of incorporeal passageways constructed from soul strength that interweaved into a net. They formed the disruptive dark screen from before, and they also formed the buffer net for the transfer of energy. The reason why there was such a huge difference between the two ability users' clones, the motorcycle gangs and Xiaoyos, lay in the fact that the former's pure energy circulation method was more beneficial to the transfer of powerful energy. It was more beneficial to the consumption and damage that occurred when the powerful energy erupted. The price actually existed at all times. It was just that the rats on the periphery became the scapegoats. From this point of view, as long as the rats didn't die out completely, the motorcycle gang's ability to continue fighting wouldn't be a problem. I need to eliminate all of these rats. Luo Nan was unable to think of any exquisite ideas in a short amount of time. He could only think in a straightforward manner. Cat Eyes could more or less understand Luo Nan's way of thinking, but she felt that it was quite funny to think about these things when they were fleeing with great difficulty. Don't make the problem childish, okay? Mr. Deep Blue Walkers who are armed to the teeth, how do you two estimate it? How do you deal with over 1,000 rats within a radius of 200, no, 500 meters in a few dozen seconds? Thanks to the mental and material image conversion function of the psychic wave network, God and Si Guisheng were able to receive a portion of the perceptual scene shared by Luo Nan and Cat Eyes. They weren't completely baffled. Right now, the two veteran burners could see thousands of gray rat silhouettes piled up like a great tide. They followed the road network and pipelines that extended in all directions of the building. They pushed forward layer by layer. Perhaps a few dozen of their own kind had exploded into a bloody paste just a moment ago, but the ones behind them stepped over the broken limbs and flesh of their own kind to continue forward. But it was also this group of rats. Practically not a single one of them would enter within a 50-meter radius. They constantly dashed and shifted, feverishly sacrificing themselves while knowing to seek advantages and avoid disadvantages. It was as if there was an awe-inspiring and orderly collective consciousness that led their overall actions. The more comprehensive the perceptual scene, the more one could feel the terrifying power within. God answered with a hoarse voice, "Old C and I have an effective attack radius of 30 meters. Our limit is 50 meters. We can't reach them at all. And the building is their natural cover. They are separated by floors and walls. Unless it's a destructive attack against the building, it will be very difficult to pose a threat to them. In other words, it would be very difficult for the two of them to display their greatest combat strength when facing the rat tide." Looking at the coincidental division of the range, these were certainly within the scope of their opponent's considerations. Cat Eyes gave Luo Nan a sidelong glance. Her meaning was, "Do you understand?" Luo Nan cast his gaze over. His pupils sparkled within the darkness. "Then, there are only two people left who can pose a threat to these rats. Yes, two people who possessed the mental side of long-range perception. Cat Eyes and Luo Nan himself. You can have the radius of 100 meters. Leave the periphery to me." Rather than saying this was a discussion, it was better to say that it was an order. "My perceptual radius is only 70 meters. That's still within 100 meters. My destructive interference just barely passed. It's enough to deal with rats. I don't need to be like a sniper who kills with one shot." The more lenient Luo Nan's response was, the more Cat Eyes found it unbearable. Actually, the two of them were quite clear in their minds. Cat Eyes' perceptual radius was not just 70 meters. Her destructive interference was not to the extent that it could not even put down rats. However, Cat Eyes instinctively displayed a lack of confidence when faced with the hundreds and thousands of rat tide, the illusory pressure transfer network, and Luo Nan himself. She was a pessimist to begin with. However, Luo Nan had already entered the circle of his own logic. All of her psychological changes were not included in the scope of his consideration. It was normal for young people to measure others by their own standards. Cat Eyes knew the problem with Luo Nan's way of thinking. But the more she understood, the more she felt the pain of being completely crushed. Needless to say, this was just a meaningless stab and confirmation. Essentially speaking, as a believer, she had to keep up with the rhythm of a god. She had to follow the orders of a god. Everything else was meaningless. Cat Eyes' teeth streaked across her lower lip, leaving behind a faint white mark. She purposely revealed a smile. "Selling my life. I admit it." In the next second, a rat's head exploded in the ventilation duct that Luo Nan had led her to earlier. The rat fell to the ground and twitched. At nearly the same time, the rat beside it exploded into a mist of blood. It was the same death, but the method of death was different. The difference was not big, but it was not small either. But in the end, a certain amount of accumulation was needed to manifest itself. Cat Eye shot a cold glance at Luo Nan. Though she did not say anything, her meaning was clear. Chapter 483. Keep going. Luo Nan indicated for Cat Eyes to continue. He did not make his move immediately. Instead, he observed Cat Eye's situation. Cat Eye's self-evaluation was basically in line with reality. She belonged to the intuitive critical strike style, and she excelled in explosively killing a single target in a flash of inspiration. If he succeeded, he would be like an immortal, as if he could ignore the distance between time and space and be unpredictable. However, this method consumed a lot of energy, and the difference between the peaks and troughs was obvious. It was very difficult to achieve precise mechanical control. Against the rat tide that was coming from all directions, killing a single target was like trying to put out a burning cart of firewood with a cup of water. Cat Eyes was truly lacking in the crucial aspect of sustainability. Her first 2 strikes were able to kill accurately, but her 3rd strike was a little off. Her 4th, 5th, and 6th strikes were even worse. She only managed to adjust to the 7th strike. There was about a 3-second gap in between, which could be considered a rhythm of ups and downs. After 2 waves of attacks, the tide of rats that surged within 100 meters did not decrease. Instead, it increased. The pressure on Cat Eyes was as great as a mountain. The motorcycle gang was in pursuit from behind, and Yuan's destructive battle could bring disaster to the fish in the moat at any time. On her side, not only did she have to ensure accuracy, she also had to ensure efficiency. All of these were things that Cat Eyes was least proficient in. This was not a problem of attitude, nor was it a problem of ability. It was a problem of whether or not he could adapt. It was already not easy for her to maintain her rhythm. Luo Nan noticed that the t-shirt beneath Cat Eye's open top was already soaked with sweat in just a few short seconds. The sweat stuck to her body. If this continued, her legs would go weak before they even reached the landing pad. This was a command error. Luo Nan immediately reacted, "Let's adjust a bit. We'll cooperate. I'll be in charge of cleaning up the perimeter, and you'll be in charge of filling in the gaps." "What are you investigating?" Cat Eyes shouted with a hoarse voice. Right now, she was nearly driven insane by the rat tide. She was unable to pay attention to Luo Nan's performance. She was in a nervous and focused state. Giving Luo Nan a response was giving him face. "We don't care about the 100-meter range. No, we don't care about the 70-meter range. Just deal with the 50-70-meter range. Deal with our left flank." Luo Nan pulled Cat Eyes with a backhand, helping her shift her center of gravity. "The 60 to 70 meters are mine. The 50 to 60 meters are yours. You just need to deal with the ones that crash into the inner circle. What will you do? Don't worry about me." The memory of the structural skeleton of the dripping sword had already triggered Luo Nan's instincts as he spoke. Luo Nan used his instincts to drive his soul strength. Just like writing a familiar character, the condensation ring and the 5 auxiliary structures, amplification, acceleration, sharpening, explosion, and guidance, were like 6 strokes that formed a complete character with a single stroke. With a single thought, a complete character was constructed. Using the intent as a pen, one could write and draw, one could carve and one could sculpt. When used on Luo Nan, who was a precision-oriented and mentally inclined ability user, there was an exquisite and tight-knit feeling of the intent reaching the form, and the intent leaving the form. Though the pressure on Cat Eyes was as great as a mountain right now, she was still able to sense Luo Nan's thoughts overflowing and leaving a mark in the void. And Luo Nan chose to use 3 seconds as a tempo interval for the sake of matching her tempo. Within these 3 seconds, the structural skeletons of the 15 dripping swords were engraved into the void. They absorbed the water molecules in the air, condensing into beads of water. Just as the water droplets appeared, the micron-scale structure of the water drop sword had already spread out in the void. Compared to the 15 water droplets, there were more than 5 times or even 10 times more. Cat Eyes made a rare mistake in her peak state. She was only able to blow apart half the body of a mouse. Luo Nan turned his head very keenly. Tired. Just as he turned his head, 15 blossoms of blood sprayed out at nearly the same time. They burst apart at the same time. An equal number of mice fell to the ground and twitched. Blood splashed from their pupils and brain juice flowed out. Then came the second wave, the third wave. Luo Nan and the others were running with all their might. The splashing water droplets and blood basically formed an elongated arc of a fan. It was like an incorporeal blade cutting through the air. Wherever the arc of water light passed, the surging and leaping shadows of mice fell to the ground in rows. The way they died could not be considered particularly tragic. The water droplets penetrated their brains and exploded. There was very little blood. Only the mice could be seen twitching on the ground. But such a simple way of dying had a treacherous and sinister coldness akin to a witchcraft curse. Cat Eyes had clearly guessed the method within, but she still needed to confirm it. The dripping sword. Yes. The speed of this move is all right. Luo Nan responded in passing, but he was still observing and evaluating in his mind. As they were cleaning up the mice, the motorcycle gang was constantly competing with them in hand speed. From time to time, a mist of blood would explode from within the rat tide. The frequency of this was extremely high. But in any case, no matter how complete the corpses of the mice that Luo Nan and Cat Eyes had dealt with earlier were, they would not explode again. His estimations were more or less the same. Though there was a high probability that these mice were products of the clone virus, their corresponding abundant life force was a necessary item to form the pressure transfer network. In other words, the motorcycle gang wanted live mice. Dead mice were worthless. Luo Nan had walked the right path. The problem was that the lethality of the dripping sword could not achieve immediate results when compared to the endless rat tide. He still had some spare energy. He could increase the frequency of the dripping sword. But when he thought about it carefully, there were some cumbersome details in the specific process that dragged down his attack speed. As Luo Nan attacked in waves, he pondered. The clone virus mice within the rat tide were all physically strong. And the stronger they were, the more developed the secretion function of their glands was. The density of water molecules between their eyes, mouth, and nose was relatively higher. The temperature was also higher than the surrounding environment. As long as his mental senses locked onto these warm and humid areas, he could directly erect the structural skeleton of the dripping sword. He could condense water to form a whole body, and he could directly strike the dripping sword into the weakest areas of the mice. And in this way, the 3 auxiliary structures of range increase, acceleration, and guidance could be eliminated. It was enough as long as the sharpening and explosion effects were preserved. Also, since this was an urgent method, the dripping sword would explode as soon as it was formed. There was no need to rigidly adhere to the precision and stability of the structure. Luo Nan's thoughts spun a few times, and the structure of the dripping sword underwent minute changes wherever his thoughts went. Though the amount of mental energy placed on each structural skeleton was small, there was a qualitative change when they converged together. It was like calligraphy, changing from regular script to cursive. The square and strict characters instantly flowed and danced. Fine. Actually, the dripping sword, which didn't need a stable structure, was simply too cool to throw. Luo Nan and his party ran out 200 meters in the next half a minute. And at the same time, at least 500 dripping swords were thrown out like splashing water. The corpses of mice were thrown out in the left wing area of the squad. It didn't matter if these mice were hidden in the pipes, in the corners of the walls, in the crevices, or under the tables and chairs. But as long as they breathed, a bead of water would always appear around their faces. Then it would pierce straight into their vitals. Luo Nan's dripping sword was thrown more and more casually, but the effects were getting better and better. In the end, he nearly forgot about the technique of the dripping sword. He just locked onto the corresponding area with his thoughts. It was like a stroke of a pen, leaving behind incomplete traces. 3 seconds later, the water vapor would condense into a bead, and the bead would enter the eyes, enter the brain, and explode to claim their lives. During this process, there were mice that would explode into a bloody mist from time to time without any warning. Their vitality was used by the biker gang to vent their pressure. But on the left wing, within the area of 100 meters, the density of mice finally began to clearly drop. This was especially true in the area from 50 to 60 meters. Cat Eyes was there to check and fill in the gaps. This woman was getting more and more on the right track. Her performance was becoming more and more savage. The scattered mice that crashed into this area all had their heads explode. They died without a complete corpse, completely clearing out this area. In the end, Luo Nan didn't even notify Cat Eyes. He expanded the 70-meter defensive line outward until it reached 200 meters. At the same time, he filled in a semicircle in the direction of the right wing, forming a complete strangulation circle. When he discovered, his thoughts stirred. When he thought about it, he drew his pen and seized his life. It felt great, right? But after firing a few rounds in a row, no one could escape the feeling of emptiness. The consumption of Luo Nan's mental strength was considerable. Luo Nan remembered that he once viewed the large-scale splashing of dripping swords as pouring milk. It wasn't without reason. And more importantly, it was too dry and dull. Right now, Luo Nan viewed this process in a different way. From his perspective, he was no longer hunting and killing targets. Instead, he was using his mental senses to weave a net. He was using a special form to interfere with specific areas of the material world. These areas were where the mouths and noses of the mice drooled. The form of interference was the dripping sword. A specific form in a specific area formed the results he needed. It was like a simple equation. But looking at it this way, his overall method of interference was still clumsy. It was just a copy and paste method without any technical content. It was still a manual operation. Yes, on the plane of reality, there were still 3 seconds of time for the water droplets to condense. It was quite annoying. Many times, Luo Nan had already succeeded. But because the water droplets had yet to condense and take form, the motorcycle gang was the first to explode their targets. Otherwise, Luo Nan's battle results would have increased by 20 to 30%. There must be a more efficient method. There must be. Humans were always lazy by nature. When faced with large amounts of repetitive work and repetitive problems, they would always consider using a simple method to completely solve the related problems. Luo Nan was not an exception. But before he could think through it thoroughly, a few rounds of dripping swords passed. The rat tied within 200 meters of the left and right wings had become scattered and sparse, faster than he had anticipated. It was the same when he pushed further into the periphery. Only now did Luo Nan discover that the motorcycle gang had already urged the rat tide to move to the side and rear. Moreover, they had pulled the team to a distance of 200 meters. It was very clear that the other side had felt the disturbance brought about by the large amount of losses in the rat tide. And this disturbance was very annoying. It's effective. God, who was covering the rear, was able to see the direction of the rat tide's movement clearly through thermal imaging and other sensing equipment. He clearly let out a long breath. But he still found it a bit hard to believe, this kind of sweeping efficiency. How did they kill them later on? Mr. Luo, your protective suit has entered interference mode. Did the president make a move? Ha! Luo Nan was stunned. He subconsciously pressed his chest lightly. Sure enough, his chest armor was slightly hot. He checked the relevant records of the mission channel. Sure enough, the Hexier had already automatically switched to the X frequency band. Chapter 484. The Lilan district was located in the eastern part of Xia City. It was one of the secondary centers of the city. In the middle of its main business district, the Shangding Triad high-rise office buildings were located here. There were many high-rise buildings around the office building, and the floor area ratio was so high that the low-rise areas below the 18th floor of the building only matched the surrounding environment when the lights were turned on at night. This area belonged to the Xia City branch of the Wilderness Explorers Society. Although there was a severe lack of lighting and the air was hardly fresh, many members of the association still liked to come here when they had nothing to do. After all, on the 13th floor of the Shangding building, in a large laboratory that occupied the entire floor, there was a veteran otaku. He was also a veteran ability user and extraordinary. He was the president of the Xia City branch, Ouyang Qin. President Ouyang himself was not very sociable. He was always hiding in the laboratory. One might not even see his shadow for 10 days or half a month. But if people mustered up enough courage and could come up with valuable questions to ask, they would often gain something. Of course, people had to be clear about what was free time and what was busy. For example, tonight, there was no fool who dared to trouble President Ouyang. Since an hour ago, the outside world had been continuously sending some materials into the biological laboratory in the West Tower. Dozens of researchers and experimental assistants were seizing the time to analyze and characterize the relevant materials. It was a busy scene. Clone number 1 is here. Send it to the control panel immediately. Why are you only here now? It had been almost half an hour since the suspected gene sample had been delivered. By the way, report the extraction progress. The console will see the results soon. At present, we have extracted some of the gene fragments, but we have not found the complete DNA. The specific report has just been sent. Has the guild leader signed for it? The president is at the main building's maintenance team. All right. Compared to the biology team, the maintenance team located in the main building area was responsible for the construction and maintenance of the global psychic wave network. This was the true backbone of the laboratory, and it was also responsible for the main business of the laboratory. The vast majority of the 50 or so people in the squad might not be considered experts, but without them, the psychic wave network, which covered the entirety of Xia City and even several important regions of the world, could collapse at any time. The person in charge of the biology team was also helpless. Don't forget to urge the chairman to sign it. In addition, another clone had arrived. In order to prevent enemy infiltration, the maintenance team had to send people to reconfirm the isolation of the psychic wave network. If something goes wrong, the guild leader will have to clean up the mess. Oh, what about this? The lab assistant showed the bag in his hand that had just been extracted. It was in good condition but had no value in the laboratory. Seal it up first. We'll wait for the president to come and do an in-depth examination. The assistant made an okay gesture, sealed the bag into a sterile bag, marked it, and put it aside. At this point, the short period of communication caused by the transfer of the clone body ended, and everyone in the biological group once again began their endless tests and experiments. They were so busy that none of them noticed that, inside the sterile bag that had been sealed, a mold was growing at an unusual speed in the corner of the bag that had not been cleaned yet. When it expanded to a certain scale, it suddenly ignited in cold flames and evaporated into nothingness. During this process, the people nearby came and went. Most of them were members of the biology team. However, there was also an engineer from the maintenance team who hurried over to check several key points inside and outside the laboratory. The target was thus locked on. A corner of the sterile bag silently penetrated the small hole, and a subtle composition flowed out, covering the body of the engineer who passed by like a formless mist. The alarm went off. With the sound of the alarm, the maintenance team laboratory on the 13th floor of the main building had entered a state of emergency. The relevant information flowed in like a river. Expand. Expand access. Access reserve resources according to plan. At present, 25% of reserve resources have been injected into the vicinity of the municipal plaza at the request of Vice President He. Do you wish to transfer it? The person in charge said without hesitation, expand access is optimal. Transfer according to plan. At the same time, expand the environmental monitoring of the target area. Old Gao, wait a moment. Ha! Ouyang Chen had been quietly sitting in a corner since afternoon. Aside from his limited contact with the outside world, he had practically never issued any orders to the laboratory. His sudden words immediately attracted the attention of the majority of people. The municipal plaza is also very important. After all, there are millions of lives there. How about this? Reserve resources will still be executed according to the allocated quota. Maintain a reserve. Splitting forces is a big taboo. The person in charge today was Xia City's psychic, a B-rank powerhouse, Gao Meng. He had a deep friendship with Ouyang Chen, so he spoke very casually. Then what about our boss Luo's side? Ouyang Chen didn't immediately respond. Instead, he raised his head to look at the central region of the laboratory. On the central control panel over there was the latest surveillance projection of the battlefield inside the Kawang Communications building. It was omnidirectional, multi-angle, and detailed. However, the engineers present rarely raised their heads to look at it. They all preferred to use the Hexier's relevant functions to investigate the situation. In normal working conditions, the relevant functions were strictly restricted in order to guarantee the privacy of users using the psychic wave network. Only in this sort of emergency wartime situation did these geeks, who stayed in the laboratory all year round, have the opportunity to personally experience the excitement of the danger of war. Right now the battle in the Kawang Communications building was in full swing. Whether it was He Yuan's valiant collision with the motorcycle gang, or the grey rat tide that surged over from all directions, or Luo Nan's group running for their lives, all of this caused the geeks' blood to boil and their blood to run cold. Ouyang Chen raised his head to see the scene of Luo Nan unleashing the first few waves of the dripping sword. It was as if an incorporeal blade had streaked across. In terms of the excitement of the scene, this was far from being comparable to the great battle between He Yuan and the motorcycle gang in the cargo corridor. But Ouyang Chen paid a great deal of attention to these rats that fell one after another. Of course, he also paid great attention to the cause of their deaths. The dripping sword, right? The dripping sword. It's a machine gun. But, it's just that it's a bit faster. It's fine against a rat horde. Actually, it's just a rat horde. Its efficiency is a bit lacking. What? You don't feel good about being crushed by a kid? Am I such a narrow-minded person? Gao Meng rubbed the stubble on his chin. Then he stiffly skipped over this topic. You're right about not using backup resources. Conventional mental storms won't have any effect on this type of clone body. And if you want to directly interfere with the material plane, it's a bit more efficient for you to directly make a move for now. But if you make a move, the consumption won't be small. Fortunately, there's always room for recovery here. And it's better to make a move earlier than later. Even the researchers and engineers who had worked together with Ouyang Chen for many years raised their eyebrows when they heard the conversation between Ouyang Chen and Gao Meng. There were a few fellows who didn't have work to do at the moment. They simply drove their portable chairs over. It was always very, very refreshing when extraordinaries made a move. How could they miss this opportunity? Right at this time, the maintenance engineer who had just returned from the biological laboratory just so happened to enter the door. He heard this news and immediately moved over. Moreover, he unconsciously took a few more steps to cut into the inner circle. The group of people thought that Ouyang-chin was going to make a move to interfere, but the following change in the situation left the maintenance team stupefied. What the hell is this? There's even this kind of operation. Compared to the machine gun style of the dripping sword, Luo Nan's modified method had already exceeded the limits of perception for most people. There was no reflection of water droplets. There was no trajectory of flight. Several dozen or over 100 rats inexplicably fell to the ground and died. The way they died was exactly the same as when the dripping sword killed them. But what about the process? Even though the staff members present used the psychic wave network to observe from up close, they were still confused for a time. As a powerful B-rank psychic, Gao Meng's eyesight surpassed that of the vast majority of people here. But because his eyesight was too good, he, who had the nickname of Heavenly Master, could not help but hiss when he saw this treacherous method. Wu Meinyang is most likely giving him special treatment. It was still Luo Nan's method of using the dripping sword. His train of thought wasn't anything out of the ordinary, but the engraved structural skeleton was skillful and nimble. It was as if he was scribbling with a pen. Plus, the effect of removing the intent and leaving the form behind could only prove that Luo Nan's foundational skills in the dripping sword had already reached the pinnacle of perfection. He could completely look down upon the vast majority of ability users in Xia City and even the entire world who practiced this type of method. Gao Meng grimaced in pain for a time. When did he start practicing this? I'm not too sure about that. You should be able to find out from headquarters. Don't we have to accept missions to download teaching materials? Gao Meng subconsciously wanted to log into headquarters website, but Ouyang-chen's gaze swept over him from behind his glasses. He finally remembered what time it was and could only laugh in embarrassment. The group of researchers and engineers were a bit disappointed that they were unable to see Ouyang-chen make a move. However, they were able to see the genius methods of the legendary boss Luo. It was quite beneficial. In particular, there were quite a few people among them who had mastered the dripping sword. Right now, their feelings were even more complicated. Some people felt that their own family's dripping sword already had some attainments. It was hard not to feel a bit embarrassed right now. There were also some people who felt that the power of this technique was too small. There were too many restrictions when it came to making a move. They weren't willing to waste too much effort. But when they saw Luo Nan's demonstration, they gave birth to thoughts of studying it once more. The maintenance team discussed spiritedly for a time. The core topic of discussion was this boss Luo too much of a genius? Or was it because the dripping sword was cultivated to the pinnacle that it had this kind of ability? The reason why the maintenance team was distracted in their discussion was because the situation over at Kuwang Communications Building had once again entered a controllable state. Following Luo Nan's wanton slaughter of the rat tide, the distance between their group and the biker gang chasing them had already increased to 40 meters. It was without a doubt that the assault against the rat tide had certainly divided a portion of the biker gang's attention. And under He Yuan's powerful strength, these problems had appeared in a rather astonishing amplification. Right now, the exit of the passageway leading to the hangar was in sight. It was at most 50 meters away. But at this time, Ouyang-chin and Gao Meng in the laboratory, Gao De, Si Guoxing, and the others in the cargo passageway all furrowed their brows. Chapter 485. Don't retreat. God repeated this command. Then he explained to Luo Nan and Cat Eyes, who were focused on intercepting the rat tide, we have no way to safely ascend at this distance. Cat Eyes teased, actually, we should be moving forward, right? It looks like old Gao has quite the offensive ability. God didn't respond. He just reported the current situation. Their group was 50 meters away from helipad number 76. Adding the distance to the aircraft, they were over 70 meters away. This distance, plus the time it would take to ascend, would take 40 seconds. At the same time, Hiyuain and the biker gang were 40 meters away from them. Judging from the previous battle, the biker gang would need 40 to 50 seconds to cross this area under Hiyuain's interception. And if the biker gang were to truly push into the vast area of the helipad, they would lose the restrictions of the cargo corridor. Controlling the direction and speed of their assault would undoubtedly be an even more arduous task. In the end, this wasn't a race. In actual combat, an advantage of a few seconds was equivalent to no advantage at all. While Luo Nan and Cat Eyes were cleaning up the rat tide, the data link between the deep blue walkers had already calculated many times. They came to a consensus: if they retreated any further, the final result would most likely be a life-and-death battle on the spacious helipad with the wreckage of the aircraft. Instead of this, it would be better to resolve the problem in the relatively favorable environment of the cargo corridor. Luo Nan's group stopped and turned to face the cargo corridor behind them. They were only 30 meters away from the exit of the corridor. Gao Meng smacked his lips in the Shounding building several dozen kilometers away. His conclusion was roughly the same as the other side: we must counterattack. We must counterattack in this cargo corridor. Ouyang, if you really want to make a move, then do it here. Ouyang Chen looked at the problem from a slightly different angle. The opponent has been pressing the line all this time. He has quite a bit of strength to spare. He has grasped the rhythm very well. He must have calculated this step from the beginning of the pursuit. So what? Gao Meng disapproved. We predicted this earlier. The one behind him isn't extraordinary to be able to reach this step by relying on the clone body. His consciousness is there. It would be strange if he couldn't do it. The problem right now is to first bring him back before anything else. It's better to make a move earlier than later. You're the one who said it. Don't tell me you want to test the youngsters again. Ouyang Chen adjusted his glasses and replied with a smile: I can't stop young people from having their own ideas. Look, his efficiency hasn't decreased at all. Indeed, Luo Nan hadn't considered the factors on Ouyang Chen's side. He was in high spirits right now in sweeping the rat tide, especially considering a deeper problem. He replied without thinking: completely wipe out the rat tide and destroy the pressure transfer network. That fellow won't be able to last much longer than the last one. God still believed that the psychic wave network had actively interfered in the latter half of the rat tide. Rather than asking President Ouyang to eliminate the rat tide, it would be better to directly kill the target. Mr. Luo can submit a request. The train of thought on both sides was on completely different channels, but Luo Nan still listened to the opinions of professionals. He followed the procedures he learned earlier and sent out an application through Channel X. Luo Nan didn't care that the other side didn't respond immediately after he sent out the corresponding message. Cat Eyes had completely stopped what she was doing. Currently, there were no living rats within a radius of 100 meters. She knew about Luo Nan's battle results from the few rounds of sweeping. However, she had no intention of correcting God's mistaken perception. She just said to Luo Nan, the difficulty has increased. Since the biker gang had already discovered the abnormal decrease in the rat tide, they had already shifted the distribution area of the rat tide to the side and the rear 200 meters away. The distance between them and Luo Nan and the others had already increased to nearly 300 meters. This sort of distribution situation had already exceeded the range of Cat Eye's all-encompassing senses. It was already hard for her to grasp the situation completely. She only knew that Luo Nan was still killing. But even if the distance factor wasn't taken into account, it was hard to avoid intense interference from the central battlefield if one wanted to use the mental to interfere with the material plane to continue killing the target. Luo Nan grunted, there's a bit of a problem. The pace of battle in the cargo corridor was extremely fast. In the time it took for Luo Nan and the others to stop speaking, the distance between Hiyuain and the biker gang had shrunk to within 30 meters. They really couldn't retreat at this time. God and Si Guoxing had already gathered their full attention. As professional security personnel, they didn't know what President Ouyang was planning. But their professionalism still drove them to make the steadiest choice. They still maintained their front and rear positions. God crossed his arms, erecting a high-strength alloy shield to serve as a defensive checkpoint. Si Guoxing carried the portable electromagnetic cannon on his shoulder. He stabilized the cannon's muzzle and aimed it at the flitting and leaping figures. The format of fire of the two surged and linked with each other. Their energies interconnected, realizing the effect of 1 + 1 > 2. Luo Nan had always been relatively sensitive to the format of fire. His telepathic thoughts cut across, and he knew that the format of fire of the two had actually left an opening for He Yuan. With He Yuan's abilities, even if she couldn't reach the standard of Tian Bang setting up the format domain by himself that day, it would be hard to say if she had the support of these two elite burners. If this was the case, then there was still a fight to be had. Luo Nan's gaze turned and cast toward the battlefield within the passageway. But the focus of his gaze did not fall upon the battlefield. It didn't even fall upon any part of the material plane. It was just cast into nothingness. Right now, he still retained his examination and contemplation of the repetitive work and repetitive problems of the dripping sword. The problem of how to use the dripping sword to sweep through the rat tide in a more efficient and more technical manner occupied the majority of his brain's resources. This was a simplification of the problem in a certain sense. In any case, Luo Nan had professional security personnel and President Ouyang supporting him from behind the scenes. Luo Nan wasn't worried about his life. Instead, he entered a long-term testing state at the edge of the battlefield. Luo Nan was already quite adept at the normal application of the dripping sword. He could casually dismantle and apply the entire structural skeleton. He could even rely on his feelings to draw on his own power. Such a situation was faintly similar to the training and fighting methods of the martial arts lineage that Gym Master Xiu had taught him. The routines that Luo Nan normally practiced and the variations in moves that he researched were all for the sake of making the most correct and effective response in actual combat. He normally trained with the dripping sword. He would choose the best of the several hundred dripping swords every day. He would compare them to the parts that were left to the end. He would ponder deeply, refer to, and make corrections. He would constantly temper and optimize the core structural skeleton, making it more and more reasonable and efficient. Now that he was in an actual combat state, there was no need to delve into the details. He just needed to take out the established results and seek killing efficiency. When this efficiency was raised to the extreme, all of the techniques would be integrated into one. They were like the marks of a pen. It was enough to see just a bit of ink. The problem was that Luo Nan wasn't satisfied. If he was only dealing with one or a few enemies, his methods could be said to be like moving clouds in flowing water, lifting something heavy as if it were light. However, when the enemies expanded to hundreds and thousands, no matter how concise and quick the movements were, they would appear monotonous and clumsy after being repeated countless times. No matter how smooth a single line is, the overall effect is trash when it's mechanically piled up. Luo Nan took out the standard for sketching. He took the entire process from the moment he made his move into his field of vision and evaluated it. From this perspective, the current battlefield environment of the rat tide and the confrontation between the strong was a special canvas. The skeleton structure of the dripping sword, which Luo Nan had tempered over and over again, was the brush. Painting on a canvas with a paintbrush was a special process of interference between the mental and the material. After this idea became clear, Luo Nan suddenly discovered that it was of the same origin as his train of thought when he constructed the living starry sky. They were both results of redefining and observing the world from a holistic perspective. They were solidified in a way that conformed to his habits of thinking. This was the process of Luo Nan's self-cognition. As his train of thought grew clearer and more intuitive, the corresponding feeling grew more and more intense. As a painter, it was obviously possible to casually draw on the canvas. However, the lack of beauty, the abandonment of rules and logic gave Luo Nan a rather terrible experience. Was there no efficient, orderly, rigorous, and even a bit of beauty in the overall form of interference? Oh, there was. Wasn't President Ouyang's logic world just like this? Why did his train of thought seem to have returned to the concept of an order frame? If this was the case, then his train of thought just now was simply a form of creating a brand new order frame. Of course, this kind of creation depended on time and local conditions. It was a kind of temporary method with many restrictions. Luo Nan circled around a few times, and all sorts of thoughts that he had accumulated over this period of time began to surge. He faintly felt that he already had a few similar results. However, he had grown far too quickly in these past 2 months, and his gains were far too great. Some of his gains were inadvertently drowned out. When it came down to it, he needed to carefully sort them out. Luo Nan was a bit distressed. What is it again? Cat Eyes didn't understand. There's something in my brain. It's... His words suddenly came to a halt halfway through. It wasn't that his train of thought had been cut off. It was that the outside world suddenly stimulated him like a sudden clap of thunder and lightning. A long ripping sound rang out at this moment, followed by the sound of an explosion. Yuan's deep blue walker armor heavily smashed through the side wall, sending rubble flying everywhere. However, she immediately spun around, forcefully changing her direction to block the front of Luo Nan and the others. She relied on this displacement to coil and soar the format of fire around her body. It connected with the flickering flames of Gao De and Siguoxing. A blazing radiance burst forth in an instant, illuminating the originally bewildering passageway with snow-white light. Format domain. In front of her, the motorcycle biker's body seemed to have ignited with fire. The surrounding warped air was wantonly transmitting high temperatures, dyeing the nearby partitions and walls with a layer of charcoal-like black. This ability user, Clone Lung, had eyes that seemed hollow yet deep. He locked onto Yuan, who had set up her format domain. His body slightly arched, looking as if he was about to unleash an explosive attack. But this fellow's movements paused in the next second. He turned his head in a very strange manner, seeming to have been disturbed by some sudden event behind him. It was also at this moment that Luo Nan saw the strange split of the other's mouth. Syllables flowed from his throat for the first time at the same time. It looks like I need to add something first. While most people were baffled, Yuan issued an order within the mission channel. Chapter 486. Siguoxing was the only one in the team with an electromagnetic gun. He fired it reflexively. Amidst the sound of electric currents, a 15-gram metal pellet exploded out of the muzzle at 20 times the speed of sound. It tore through the sound barrier. The air burned within the narrow passageway, and hot winds assaulted their faces. Siguoxing was already paying more attention to his nearby companions, but Luo Nan and Cat Eyes still had their ears rumble. They instinctively crouched down. The raging flames and heat waves surged above their heads. This kind of bombardment was not something the fleshly body could resist. However, the biker gang member displayed his super keen senses. Even though Yuan had specially used the mission channel of the psychic wave network to secretly issue orders, this fellow still shifted his position ahead of time before the artillery shell left the chamber. He narrowly avoided the trajectory of the bullet. The deafening sound of an explosion rang out at nearly the same time. Under the effect of the powerful kinetic energy, the passageway behind them collapsed in an instant. Even the structure of the upper and lower floors caved in. The entire building groaned and trembled. Yuan's figure turned from stillness at this moment. An arc of light flashed, and she pounced forward. Admittedly, the biker gang member had avoided the disaster of death by shifting his position ahead of time, but this limited his direction. In addition to the obstruction of the collapsing ruins behind him, he had practically no leeway to choose. And what he had to face right now, aside from Hiyuan's assault of an arc of light that transcended the sound barrier, there was also the rapidly expanding formatting domain. Intense light and heat waves intersected in the void. Visually, the space seemed to warp and deform. The light enveloped the surroundings in the next second, sweeping away practically every shadowy corner. It made one suspect that even their internal organs had been penetrated, turning transparent. Light and heat were always linked together, but at this moment, the heat within the passageway was greatly reduced under the all-encompassing intense light. The high temperature of the furnace, controlled by the biker gang member, was cleansed and dissipated. His body also warped and shrunk within the light. In the end, he was streaked by the swift and fierce arc of light. He smashed through the wall amidst a spray of blood and quickly fled far away. Hiyuan had already strode forward in pursuit, but after taking 2 steps, her speed suddenly decreased. The mission channel displayed the latest news: Machine Number 1's overclocking state has ended. Officer! God could not help but shout. Hiyuan took another step forward, but she still stopped. And at this time, the aura of the biker gang member, which was boiling like a furnace, rapidly cooled down and calmed down. After charging out 200 meters, he simply concealed himself without a trace. This was not just on the spiritual plane. Even when he interfered with the physical plane, there was no feedback at all. It was as if the spiritual plane had disappeared into thin air. Luo Nan was speechless when faced with this kind of opponent who hid when he said he would. Formatting the domain. Cat Eye's attention was drawn to Hiyuan. Her first impression of Hiyuan wasn't good, but after a period of observation and familiarization, as well as the shifting of hatred and other factors, her evaluation of Hiyuan became more and more fair. This wave of maneuvering is really immediate. It feels like she's not much worse than that Tianbang. That slash was also very cool. Hiyuan took a few seconds to regulate her breathing, but she was still panting a little. It was obvious that she had consumed a lot of energy just now. The enemy retreated on their own. It's probably because they cut through the supply line that they lost the ability to continue fighting. Supplies. What was going on? Is the rat tide almost cleaned up? Currently, the distance between the group and the main body of the rat tide had already exceeded the range of Cat Eye's all-encompassing senses. In comparison, the integrated sensing module of the Deep Blue Walkers was more useful. Combined with the shared images from the psychic wave network, she was able to roughly project the current state of the rat tide and the ruins behind them. It could be seen that the thermal imaging results were sporadic in the surroundings of the freight corridor, where the temperature had already dropped. The data statistics were much more convenient. God reported, there are 1437 left, 1311 left. The rate of decline is fast. According to this rate of reduction, the rat tide would be swept clean in another 10 seconds or so. Even if it was raining knives, it would be impossible to kill them off so quickly, right? Cat Eyes looked at Luo Nan in astonishment. Even she was doubting whether or not the Shangding building had joined in the interference. Luo Nan actually frowned. In the instant Hiyuan and the motorcycle gang collided, the enemy had exploded at least 500 rats in order to support the corresponding explosion. This caused the rat tide to shrink by over a quarter in an instant. But what was truly strange was that there were no decent reinforcements after that. This was the most important reason why the scale of the rat tide had shrunk. The source seemed to have been cut off. Luo Nan expanded his sensing range to cover the entire area. At this time, Hiyuan explained softly, we just sent a group of people to destroy the enemy's nest within the building. It can be considered as taking drastic measures. Cat Eyes was enlightened. A nest. That's right. Of course there's one. But do you know where it is? Since it's a nest, energy and nutrition are indispensable. In the wilderness, these nests are often placed within high-energy mineral deposits that can be absorbed and transformed. The basic conditions won't change in the city. It must be within an area suitable for replenishment. Cat Eyes snapped her fingers. The energy center. Due to the leaps and bounds in energy technology, the current mega-metropolis of Xiao City had basically achieved a decentralized distribution of energy supply. For example, the gear laboratory that Luo Nan was more familiar with was equipped with an independent power station. Large buildings like the Koan Communications Building located in the center of the bustling city were also equipped with an independent energy center. If one didn't care about the technical links such as mass to energy conversion, then the most convenient energy supply point would naturally be there. The relevant images were already connected to the mission channel as they spoke. The energy center should be a team of ability users mobilized by He Yueyin. There seemed to be a military police background as well. Right now, the operation to clear out the nest had already ended. They were currently cleaning up the mess. He Yueyin explained a step further. Right now, the SCA has already taken samples of the abnormal changes in the building's energy center. The relevant areas within the city are under full surveillance. If this sort of situation is encountered again, an emergency power cut will be needed, Cat Eyes gave her evaluation. Crushed by resources. He Yueyin had fully utilized their advantage in resources in Xiao City. Soldiers came with generals, water came with earthwear. Even if they fell into a disadvantage for a time, they could immediately carry out targeted improvements to make up for the loopholes. As the enemy's strength was gradually exposed, the enemy's space for activity would constantly shrink. The advantage of their side would grow greater and greater. This was truly the most upright way of using troops. This sort of method wasn't anything out of the ordinary. What was truly rare was that He Yueyin was in the middle of an intense battle. She was able to think and issue orders in a timely manner. Otherwise, even if they had more resources, it would be meaningless if they couldn't mobilize them properly. At this time, Cat Eyes could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Without the rat tied to die for him, that fellow would probably only be at the standard of 4 or 5 explosive strikes. Speaking of which, he's also injured. I didn't get a clear look just now. Are his injuries serious enough? His chest was cut open. His internal organs are damaged. He Yueyin's breathing had completely returned to normal at this time. Her breathing was practically non-existent. She wore an exoskeleton armor and her face was covered by a helmet. She looked like an ice-cold robot. In reality, her thoughts were as calm as a machine's. The enemy's retreat isn't necessarily a good thing. From the design of the ability user clone body, it can be seen that they weren't built for a protracted battle from the very beginning. Moreover, they were able to perfectly conceal themselves even after being injured. This only proves that their injuries didn't truly affect their strength. God expressed his approval. That's right. Clone bombs and ability user assassins are the true job of these fellows. Cat Eyes rubbed her chin. After all, they aren't true life forms. If they were to throw caution to the wind and self-destruct, I don't know what the scene would be like. Oh, if that's the case, could it be that they relied on the rat tied to greatly exhaust your physical strength in preparation for the final strike? Are you still okay? He Yueyin didn't directly respond to Cat Eyes' inquiry. She only added, they were also measuring my limits. It would be more advantageous for me to make a final judgment. At the same time, they might be luring me to get used to the intensity from before, causing me to make an error in judgment at the last moment. Wait for the thunderous strike. Cat Eyes' gaze swept over her companions and the surrounding ruined environment. Even if you think with your toes, you'll know that the moment when the flying device takes off is the most perfect. With that fellow's ability and destructive power, it's simply an unbreakable knot. Why didn't they wait until then to reveal their trump card? Guishing spoke in a deep voice. This was the first time he had taken the initiative to participate in a discussion since joining the team. His thoughts were extremely clear. The target clearly possesses extremely powerful concealment techniques. The building surveillance and sensor systems haven't discovered any traces of him up until now. It's because the rat tide is hard to conceal. A certain someone is extremely sensitive. Cat Eye's gaze turned and pointed straight at Luo Nan. Luo Nan didn't react at all. Cat Eyes had long since grown accustomed to his wandering soul. She just shrugged. In the end, a counterattack is the most correct choice. In the inner world, strength ultimately speaks for itself. The problem is, where is he? We haven't discovered any traces yet, but the rat tide is about to arrive. Oh, they've all been killed. Don't just look at the group of people conversing at the end of the passageway. Most of their attention was focused on observing the surveillance. They were trying to search for the hidden and dangerous target. But so far, they had found nothing. Everyone's gazes inevitably turned to Luo Nan. Little did they know that Luo Nan's heart was quite vexed right now. The scale of the rat tide rapidly cleared to zero, representing the complete collapse of the so-called pressure transfer network. But from his perspective, the nature of his paper rapidly changed. The feelings he had just accumulated also vanished like smoke into thin air. Even if he had some clues right now, he could forget about experimenting with them. Fortunately, he was able to notice the gazes of his companions. He withdrew his mind somewhat unwillingly and asked suspiciously, "What did you guys say?" Everyone was already immune to this sort of reaction. He Yueyin immediately repeated the relevant problem in a simple and clear manner. Her main focus was still on the whereabouts of the motorcycle gang. Luo Nan shook his head. That fellow certainly has some method to interfere with mental senses. I fell for it before. If I do it again, I don't dare to say that my senses will be correct. For example, right now. It's impossible for that fellow to just flee a kilometer or two away. But the truth is that I can't find any traces of him at all. He believed that the motorcycle gang should have a method of assimilating with the surrounding environment. This included the optical aspect and the deeper information aspect. In this case, he would inevitably be troubled by the corresponding camouflage colors unless he completely gathered and analyzed the information on the material plane within a radius of several kilometers. Luo Nan finished his analysis and looked at He Yueyin. But He Yueyin still had her metal visor facing him. Actually, it wasn't just He Yueyin. Gao Di and Guishing had the same posture. Their gazes pierced through the visor to stare at him. Luo Nan just felt baffled. He turned to look at Cat Eyes, who looked quite normal. Ah. What did I miss? Cat Eyes blinked. She made an exaggerated expression of astonishment in an instant. 1 kilometer. Why 1 kilometer? Vice President He, what was the range of his all-encompassing senses when someone reported last time? How would I know how much he said last time? Luo Nan saw this and immediately knew that he had inadvertently let the cat out of the bag. The speed at which his mental senses expanded and the frequency of changes had already drowned out his memory reserves. Luo Nan's mind went blank for a moment. He could only answer vaguely, my senses toward living beings are more sensitive right now. My all-encompassing senses are a bit higher than normal. Cat Eyes laughed. Your family senses are 10 times or 20 times. Luo Nan glared fiercely at her. It doesn't matter if it's 10 times or 20 times. It doesn't matter if you can't find the enemy. Is there a need to keep harping on this? You'll be happy when I tell you the number of 20 kilometers later, right? Ha! An inexplicable inspiration popped up in the depths of Luo Nan's mind in this instant. Luo Nan's current level of mental senses really wasn't his highest level. His highest level was still when his soul left his body, when he completely broke free from the shackles of his fleshly body. In the past, there was a huge disparity between the fusion of body and soul and the separation of body and soul. This was mainly due to the serious imbalance between his mind and his body. Right now, Luo Nan was following Gym Master Xiao in tempering his fleshly body. He also received the reverse nourishment of his soul strength. His toughness had increased by a large margin. In addition, he was influenced by the gear telescope format. The form of mental senses underwent a substantial transformation, and its efficiency grew day by day. The disparity between the two states grew smaller and smaller. But in reality, the disparity between the limits of his soul strength and his fleshly body was growing larger. The reason why it didn't lead to more serious consequences was because Luo Nan made full use of the miraculous effects of the neuron in the outside world. It was also because his attainments and the mutual interference between the mental and the material had increased by a large margin. In short, if he were to leave his body right now, he would indeed have the ability to raise the level of his mental senses to another level. At that time, Luo Nan's face drooped, and the light that flickered in his mind grew brighter and brighter. That's right. At that time, he would use a special method to realize the mutual interference between the mental and material planes. The soul cloak. Yes. Yes. He had just thought of the paintbrush and canvas, but he wasn't able to understand the method of interference clearly. It was the soul cloak. Luo Nan still remembered that he had just comprehended the mysteries of the condensation ring that day. He had used it as a medium to forcefully interfere with the material world, allowing him to bring the external neuron to gear and open the mysterious door leading to the cloud world. It was during this process that the soul cloak was molded and formed with the help of the condensation ring, allowing his soul strength to truly cross the boundary between the mental and material planes. He realized a breakthrough from 0 to 1, achieving an unprecedented interference effect. His sense of familiarity came from this. The cloak. Could the interference effect of the dripping sword be like this? No. It was the same method. The difference between having and not having a clear direction was enormous. And Luo Nan was used to the condensation ring, which had no killing power at all. If he were to add the support structures one by one, what sort of effect would there be? He really wanted to test it out right now. Luo Nan nearly left his body right away. Luckily, he still remembered what time it was right now. Once his soul left his body, his fleshly body would be tantamount to an empty shell. He might not be able to react in time if he encountered an unexpected event. He was still able to distinguish between priorities and urgency. But if this was the case, so what if he didn't leave his body? In any case, it was a method of mutual interference between the mental and the material. It didn't seem to matter if he left his body or not. At most, he could make the external neuron in his brain change its form. It would change from a fluid form that was as bright as a dragon to a fixed form like the condensation ring. Would there be any danger? Luo Nan didn't think too much about it. In fact, the external neuron in his brain had already coiled and twisted the moment his philosophy changed, forming a perfect condensation ring structure. Then, a cool and comfortable feeling spread out from his brain. It was as if a layer of mint had been smeared near his brain. It was cold, cool, and extremely comfortable. Was this the condensation ring letting water seep out? Ha! Luo Nan's body suddenly froze when this thought was confirmed. Then cold sweat flowed down. He had actually condensed the condensation ring in his brain, and he had even allowed it to freely absorb water molecules. This was a standard case of pouring water into his brain. It must be known that water made up 70% of a human's body weight. With the powerful might of the condensation ring, it only took a breath to separate and purify bodily fluids and condense them into a bead of water. If he had placed several support structures into the ring, his brain might have exploded by now. This was a high-end way of dying that not even the cloned rats had enjoyed. Presumably, it would be passed down in Xiao City and even the entire inner world, becoming a joke for 100 years. Luo Nan's body was covered in cold sweat, and he wanted to immediately disperse the structure. However, the cool and comfortable feeling continued. The condensation ring formed by the external neuron did not form a substantial bead of water to fill his brain. Only the cool feeling continued to spread. It seeped from his brain to his face, to his neck, to his chest, back, waist, and finally to his legs and even the tips of his fingers. Even his hair was seeping with cool air. This cool feeling was like an endlessly expanding membrane that covered every corner of his body. It continued to expand outward, brushing past the surrounding void as if it were weightless. At this very moment, the 3 deep blue walkers, who were equipped with advanced sensing equipment, did not discover any abnormalities. Only Cat Eyes looked at him with some confusion, but she did not obtain any concrete results. What followed was a feeling that grew more and more familiar. It was exactly the same as the soul cloak that unfurled after his soul left his body. This marvelous cloak that hovered between the tangible and the intangible simultaneously unfurled toward the mental and material worlds. On the mental plane, it drifted in the polar domain. On the material plane, it affected the microscopic. From beginning to end, it maintained a certain distance from the world that ordinary people were used to, yet it could cut in at any time. Luo Nan's grasp on the mental plane was quite good. After all, this was a mysterious and undetermined region. What he saw was what he got. What he knew was everything. But on the microscopic plane, 1,000 years of physics development had already drawn the basic picture of the microscopic world. With the existing knowledge system, Luo Nan was certain that his submicron level sensing precision was far from being able to touch the true microscopic world. However, the marvelous effects of the condensation ring manifested here. He really could not see it, but he could clearly feel the marvelous disturbances within the area covered by his mental senses. The atmosphere, the building, and the human body were like the gentle flapping of a cloak. And when Luo Nan's thoughts took effect, the boundless power that came from the mental side instantly suppressed the relevant disturbances. The cloak expanded and rippled according to his thoughts. It was as if it ruled the entire microscopic plane. With Luo Nan's current knowledge structure, wanting to give this phenomenon an accurate and comprehensive explanation was tantamount to a lunatic's ravings. He did not count on this. He just needed to use his own clairvoyance to decipher it. This was an interference painting that used the condensation ring as the tip of the brush and the surrounding material plane as the canvas. The cloak was the result of the painting. But this result was a product of the unconscious. It could change at any time as Luo Nan's consciousness entered it. All he needed to know was what direction the change was. And so, he needed to have a clear train of thought. But new information formed within the natural disturbances of the cloak before Luo Nan could sort things out. It was transmitted back. The high-speed moving target caused the natural disturbances on the microscopic plane to deform. Large amounts of ingenious hedging operations were carried out, causing the traces to be mostly cancelled out before they could be transmitted to the normal perceptible plane. The traces were ingeniously buried within the multifarious and complex flow of information. The technique was marvelous, but these operations appeared excessively noisy if one were to use the microscopic background as a reference. They were too orderly and deliberate. The motorcycle gang. The concrete facts had just been restored to Luo Nan's mind when another stimulus followed. Compared to the exquisite and peerless concealment and control of the cloak, this wave was simply an explosive attack. Luo Nan did not need to decode too much to figure out the direction and the concrete changes. It was the explosive growth history of a cell. Under the effect of some inconceivable method, a single cell rapidly absorbed an enormous amount of energy on the submicron scale. It borrowed this energy to carry out a frenzied fission and proliferation. Then it completed the transformation from a single cell to a complete life form. Then it divided and proliferated, a complete set of processes. As for the appearance of the proliferated life form, Luo Nan had already encountered it countless times before. The gray and white rat shadows were like flowing turbid liquid. They sprinkled down one after another, converging into a river and surging out like a tide. Luo Nan was just about to issue an alarm when the information from the energy center entered the mission channel. The relevant monitoring personnel discovered the situation at practically the same time as Luo Nan through the changes in the power supply curve. The energy system controlled by the supercomputer reacted faster than humans by a thread. The energy supply was cut off the moment the problem appeared. However, the enemy only needed a split second to do so. It was a mechanism that had been planted in place long ago. Plus, those were probably not real rats. Luo Nan noticed that this wave of gray and white rat tide did not realize a complete conversion of mass and energy. The things that surged out from the energy center were more like phantoms of the rat tide than the rat tide. They existed between reality and illusion. Perhaps this was closer to the essence of the enemy's design. The rats were not just rats. They were special networks that were used to shift enormous pressure and increase the operating space. The network was just a network. The true killer move still lay in the concealed fellow who had yet to emerge. Luo Nan could not afford to delay no matter what. He could not afford to delve any deeper into his research. He followed closely the warning information raised by the energy center. Through the functions of the psychic wave network, he directly made changes to the intelligence map integrated into the mission channel. But the problem was that he was actually unable to make changes. According to the feedback from the psychic wave network system, there was an even higher level of authority to synchronize the operation, and the overlap rate reached 100%. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.